right, so this is Occult Theocracy, Volume 1, written in 1933 by Edith Starr Miller, who died, and then it was published. I went with this because it's a chick. I've been reading a lot of dudes. Probably good to get a chick in there. I'm not doing this one live all the time. I might do it once in a while if something looks interesting, but I'm just going to add it to my repertoire. I'll start at the beginning. Is that everything good? Good. Occult Theocracy, Volume 1, Edith Starr Miller, Lady Queenborough. Occult Theocracy in 2 volumes. Volume 1, Theocracy, adaptation of Greek, eso whatever, from Eo, God, plus the exopoia, mingling, God mingling. 1. Ancient myth, a mingling of various deities or divine attributes into one personality. Also a mixture of the worship of different deities. Murray, New English Dictionary. To the memory of my uncle Lloyd E. Warren, who first guided me in this book, first published in 1933. Do I read the foreword? Yeah, let's read the foreword. This book makes no claim to literary merit. It is simply a work of research and documentation giving evidence and facts which I trust will help the reader in drawing his own conclusions. In the course of my researches as an international political investigator into the causes of social unrest, I have probed the depths of infamy which now surrounds not ours only, but also the next generation, whose right to lead a decent life should be as good as was ours. As a woman of the world, I have witnessed things the existence of which I did not suspect, and I have realized that, due to my protected position in life, they should never have been expected to have come to my knowledge. Let me tell every woman, however much protected, whether dairymaid or duchess, that the safeguards which she imagines to be thrown around herself are but a mirage of the past. Her own and her children's future are at the mercy of those forces, the activities of which it has been my business for the last 10 years to follow as one of a group of investigators. Today, most of the good people are afraid to be good. They strive to be broad-minded and tolerant. It is fashionable to be tolerant, but mostly tolerant of evil. And this new code has reached the proportions of demanding intolerance of good. The wall of resistance to evil has thus been broken down and no longer affords protection to those who, persecuted by evildoers, stand in need of it. Worse still, there are cases wherein virtuous people's good name is relentlessly filched from them, but no effort will be made by the presumed good people to rally to their defense. Happy are they if they themselves can discover the cause of their ruin, material or moral, either partial or total. In offering this book to the public, I have endeavored to expose some of the means and methods used by a secret world, one might almost say an underworld, to penetrate, dominate, and destroy not only the so-called upper classes, but also the better portion of all classes. There are those who feel confident that if they refrain from joining any society or group and avoid entanglements, no harm can befall them. To such, let me say that situations can be and are created for innocent dupes every day, and wrecked homes are the direct result. Neither fortune nor a blameless life led, as it were, in an island of strict virtue in the midst of a tumultuous sea of evil, spells security. Irrefutable evidence of a particular example of underworld tyranny has come into my possession. The victim's guilt was her reluctance to step from virtue into the mire of evil which surrounded her. Moreover, she was intolerant of evil and sought to oppose and destroy it. The case of her persecution at the hands of her foes is complete. She belonged to what is termed society, and did also some of the other actors in this bewildering drama. Ooh, sounds spicy. The world, social, financial, legal, and shall we say also the underworld, leaving to this word its generally accepted literal meaning, knows them. So many Jekylls and Hydes stalk about unsuspectingly in our midst. From such an example, I have led to a conclusion that, among others, three factors can help one from being completely destroyed by combined forces of that underworld: a flawless life, independent means, and real friends, all three of which must be backed by a fearless determination to fight evil on all points of the Masonic compass. Ooh. In these days when apparently vice triumphs and virtue must be penalized, it may be well for all of us to fight the undertow by which our children may be dragged under and must of necessity perish. Vice rings and secret societies form but one vortex into which youth is drawn and destroyed, whilst the good people, because of their ignorance, look on helplessly in despair. It is for their instruction that this book has been written. Its compilation has taken several years, and had it not been for the generous efforts of one of my friends, me de Shishamarov, and of several other persons, I would never have been able to complete the task which I set out to accomplish. What must concern us all now is the protection of decency, or, in other words, equal rights, for such as are not vice adepts. This book is not complete. It will never be complete. But for the present, it must remain as a study of the root conditions which have led to present-day subversive upheavals and the overthrow of the principles of Christian civilization. I'm back into Christ again. I can't get away. All three of them. It's cool, though. It's cool. This sounds dense. Do you want to do the first one? Sure. Let's do the first chapter and I'm done. Occult Theocracy, Part 1. Jesus, here we go. Yes, let's read it. My final work is a word of warning to American women. Keep away from the swamis, the yogis, the traveling teaching men. You would need no such bidding if, for an instant, you guessed the truth. In your good faith, in your eager-minded receptivity of higher-sounding doctrine, and your hunger for color, romance, glamour, and dreams come true, you expose yourself, all unsuspecting, to things that, if you knew them, would kill you dead with unmerited shame. Catherine Mayo, in Why I Wrote Mother India. Ladies, to you, be fucking around. Mysteries of Freemasonry. Chapter 1, The Religion of the Secret. Man is a creature of mind and matter. To the realm of mind belongs metaphysical thought, which, whether trained or untrained, is peculiar to each individual and is subject for the development of or restraint to his will. It is the basis of religion in the generally accepted sense of this word. It is purely spiritual and can reach the height of mysticism. From it issue creeds of doctrines and the erection of a theological system of beliefs. Imparted to the other individuals and accepted by them, the metaphysical thought of a few great minds has become the basis of religious systems. Upon its teaching was grafted a ritual or law, disciplining the life, mystic, moral, social, and even physical, of its adherents or believers. From the exercise of such laws, theocracy, or the rule of priesthood, was evolved. It is to be found in every religion, regardless of the fact that in some instances, like in the Buddhist doctrine of Gautama and in the teaching of Jesus Christ, nothing is further removed than ritualism from the metaphysical thought or religious conception of the founders. The power of theocracy, or exercise of government rule over the masses by a hierarchy of priests or adepts, rested on its dual system of teaching, namely exoterism and esoterism. The former, a code of discipline of the thought and mode of life of the masses; the latter, the hierarchic school wherein we were trained, the chosen adepts destined to safeguard the rules imposed upon the people by the high priests. Upon a close study of the manifold religious systems, the corruption of which led to theocratic rule, namely Brahmanism, the ancient Egyptian cult, Moahism, Judaism, Christianism, and Mohammedanism, one finds the accepted belief of monotheism as the basis of esoteric or secret belief or doctrine. Ooh. Monotheism here, taken in the sense of first principle. Whereas the Egyptian high priesthood of Memphis kept this theory as the esoteric teaching of the high adepts, Moses, brought up as one of them, gave it as exoteric or popular belief to the Israelitic sect to which he belonged, embodying it in a deity, the terrible Jehovah of the Jews. Another side of the esoteric teaching was that of occultism, the development of all human psychic forces, which, when misused, led to the practice of magic. The esoteric part of all religions, or Hermeticism, the teaching and practice of occultism, led to the development of what might be termed the religion of the secret, which evidently overshadowed and helped to dissimulate subversive activities. It is with this that we are chiefly concerned, and will endeavor, to some degree, to show its baneful influence on society of all creeds and nations. Let the reader bear in mind that it is not the object of the work to discuss the place occupied in... Let the reader bear in mind that it is not the object of this work to discuss the place occupied and the part played by either metaphysics and philosophy on the one hand, and science and ritualism on the other. The limitations of each and its encroachment upon the territory of the others, the ensuing conflicts, are a matter for the history of fanaticism throughout the ages. Our aim is to follow the outgrowth of esotericism and a few of its multiple ramifications in the realm of perversion and subversion. That is it for now on that one. This is Occult, Theocracy. Started it yesterday, 1933. Edith Starr Miller, first woman author I've decided to read. Looks pretty good. It's going to be a girthy read, so I'll just keep going. Chapter 2, The Meaning of Occultism. A summary and some explanation of the principal forms of occultism must precede the chapters which deal with the historical side of this subject, and the objections, those of the credulous as well as those of the skeptics, must be foreseen and forestalled. Many persons are tempted to deny arbitrarily and without examination statements on matters of which they have no previous knowledge, but even the possible criticism of such as these must have received due consideration. In this age of wireless and aeroplanes, one of the fads of the modern highbrow is to scoff at such things as sorcerers, magic, and evocations as old wives' tales of ancient history. There are people who refuse to believe in the existence of the supernatural, perhaps we should say supernormal, even when confronted with the evidence. Such are the skeptics who deny everything. Hidebound in their prejudice, they ignore the fact that magic, white or black, has now as many adepts as ever, nor can they distinguish between the different schools of spiritualism. First, there are the charlatans who tricks in the line of spiritism are generally sooner or later unmasked. Second, there are the occultists who operate in secrecy and hide their meetings from all but initiates with the greatest care. Many persons are duped by charlatans, so the skeptics persuade themselves of the absolute non-existence of all diabolical practices in modern times. They're wrong. For occultism flourishes now in Europe, Asia, and America. The Black Mass is said today in Paris and London, and Satanism has its faithful followers. On this subject, one of the most eminent writers was Carl Haxey, who, under the pseudonym Dr. Batelli, made an extensive study of occultism and gave his extremely exaggerated views of it in the book Le Diable au, looks like 19 Cecil. The following pages of this chapter are most likely either quotations or abridgments from that work. According to the teaching of the Christian churches, God allows demons certain limited powers, but they are not permitted to open the gates of hell and release a spirit at the request of one who evokes the dead. The dead, even damned, will not show themselves if evoked, nor would evocations be answered by those who had succeeded in attaining the kingdom of heaven. But devils can and do, says the church, substitute themselves for the deceased. They will impersonate a dead person whose appearance is demanded by invocations. It is also admitted that the fallen angels or spirits will often manifest to people without being called. The Theological Hagiographia cite many cases of diabolical apparitions to saints, apparitions which these saints have been able to repel and conquer. But what skeptics and agnostic Christians alike ignore is that besides the drawing room mediums for diversion, there are occultists whose vile practices are veiled in the profoundest mystery. These men, whose moral sense is absolutely perverted, believe in Lucifer, but they believe him to be the equal of God and worship him secretly. Modern occultism is on the one hand practical Kabbalah and on the other hand Indian yogism, both of which have always had their adepts more or less openly. The Kabbalah is occult science itself. It is the secret theology of the initiates, theology essentially satanic. In a word, the counter-theology. Our God, the God of the Christians, is the powerful of evil in the eyes of the Kabbalists, and for them the power of good, the real God, is Lucifer. The Kabbalah teaches magic or the art of intercourse with spirits and supernatural beings. One cannot be a convinced Kabbalist without soon becoming a magician and devoting oneself to the practices of occultism. Not that our Kabbalists or contemporary magicians practice all the different branches of occultism. Some of these have been abandoned and others are only used by charlatans for the exploitation of superstitious persons, but a great many, precisely the most criminal and perverse, are observed in the hidden dens of our modern Luciferians. Magic has two divisions. The first is divining magic, subdivided into several branches, of which the principal are astrology, palmistry, anthropomancy, I hate big words like this, onoritics, aromancy, hydromancy, pyromancy, cartomancy. The second is operative magic, also subdivided into several branches, of which the principal are alchemy, necromancy, mesmerism, theurgy, various miraculous feats. There are, moreover, some superstitious practices not specially classed. Bataille thus defines some of the foregoing. Astrology, divining the future by the stars. The casting of horoscopes is the most prevalent practice. Palmistry, divining the future by the hand. Anthropomancy, this is one of the practices supposed at present to have fallen into disuse. It is a horrible, savage abomination and consists in the disemboweling of human being for the purpose of divining the future by inspection of the entrails. Medieval history accuses Gilles de Rais of perpetrating this crime on children, whom he lured to his castle for the purpose. Tacitus says that the Druids in ancient Britain used to consult their gods by looking into the entrails of their captives. Oneroda, I can't say that one. Honorata critics, divining the future through interpretation of dreams. Aeromancy, divination by the study of aerial phenomena. Hydromancy, divination by the study of liquids or aquatic phenomena. Pyromancy, divination by fire. Cartomancy, divination by cards. There is no need to expatiate further on the more or less grotesque means employed by those who follow these false sciences. One must be somewhat erratic to imagine that the future can be foretold by coffee grounds, by the antics of flames in a grate, or by the order in which shuffled cards will be drawn, or by the odd shapes consumed by wind-driven clouds. When events corroborate predictions made under these conditions, it can be attributed to the use of the power of clairvoyance, but these fortune tellers, some of whom have a thorough knowledge of the rules governing the practices of these absurdities, are the first to distrust their art. Such expedients, disdained by the real occultists, are too unimportant to be worthy of note. It is quite another matter to expose the Satanists ignored by the public, whose sects, bearing different names in different countries, constitute in reality only one single secret religion, whose fanatics, imbued with the spirit of evil, will sacrifice themselves blindly to their cause. Throughout the universe, all Luciferian and satanic rites bear a basic similarity. Dealing principally with the practices of contemporary operative magic, it is Bataille's opinion that as regards the mysterious art of alchemy, its theory is called Hermetic science and has a double objective, namely the discovery of the philosopher's stone, a substance capable of transmuting base metals into gold and drinkable gold, or the elixir of long life, which is a magic potion endowed with the properties necessary to prolong human life indefinitely, or at least to maintain in old age the faculties of youth. Alchemy as a science seems now obsolete. The alchemists knew the existence of microbes and toxins long before the medical discoveries of the present age. The laboratories of satanic bacteriology have been working for a long time on cultures of bacilli or solutions of their toxic properties, which, even when administered in infinitesimal doses mixed with food or drink, disseminate disease and death where it is judged necessary by the masters that life is to be destroyed. In these cases, deaths occur from apparently natural causes. He further says that magnetic mesmerism is the occult medicine of the Kabbalists. One must naturally not confuse the scientists who are at present making researches of hypnotism and suggestion in the interest of science with the emanators of Cagliostro, whose aim is to procure diversions, often wicked and immoral. Scientific magnetism is still an obscure question being studied by theologians, physiologists, and criminologists, whereas that of the adepts of magic has nothing to do with this. It is a branch of the subterranean work that is nearing its goal today. Necromancy is partly divining magic and partly operative magic. This practice consists in the evocation of the spirits of the dead. Spiritualism and rapping of tables are necromancy. Might be raping of tables are necromancy. But if all spiritists are not necessarily Kabbalists, all Kabbalists are practicing necromancy. People are far from suspecting the progress made by necromancy along these lines. Freemasonry is yearly more and more evaded by the spiritist element, to the extent that in 1889 an international convention of Spiritist Freemasons, attended by about 500 delegates, was held at the Hotel of the Grand Orient of France, Rue Cadet, Paris. This was only the beginning. Eliphas Levi, a renowned occultist of the 19th century, writing in Histoire de la Magie in the following words, sounds a warning to those who recklessly would venture into the domain of the occult. The experiences of theurgy and necromancy are always disastrous to those who indulge in them. When one has once stood on the threshold of the other world, one must die, and almost invariably under terrible conditions. First, giddiness, then catalepsy, followed by madness. It is true that the atmosphere is disturbed, the woodwork cracks, and doors tremble and groan in the presence of certain persons after a series of intoxicating acts. Weird sounds, sometimes bloody signs, will appear spontaneously on paper or linen. They are always the same and are classed by magicians as diabolical writings. The very sight of them induces a state of convulsion or ecstasy in the mediums who believe themselves to be seeing spirits. Thus Satan, the spirit of evil, is transfigured for them into an angel of light, but before they will manifest, these so-called spirits require sympathetic excitement produced by sexual intercourse on the part of their devotees. Hands must be placed in hands, feet on feet. They must breathe in each other's faces, these acts often followed by others of an obscene character. The initiates, reveling in these forms of excesses, believe themselves to be the elect of God and the arbiters of destiny. They are the successors of the fakirs of India. No warning will save them. To cure such illnesses, the priests of Greece used to terrify their patients by concentration of exaggeration of the evil in one great paroxysm. They made the adept sleep in the cave of Trophonius. After some preliminary preparations, he descended to a subterranean cavern in which he was left without light, soon to be prostrated by intoxicating gases. Then the visionary, still in the throes of ghastly dreams caused by incipient asphyxia, was rescued, being carried off, prophesying on his tripod. I just read about this in the other book. These tests gave their nervous system such a shock that the patients never dared mention evocations of phantoms again. Theurgy is the highest degree of occultism. Necromancy is limited to the summoning of dead souls, but the theurgists of the 19th century evoke entities qualified by them as genii, angels of light, exalted spirits, spirits of fire, etc. In their meetings, scattered throughout the world, they worship Lucifer. The three mysterious letters JBM that the common initiates see in the Masonic temples are reproduced in the meeting rooms of the Luciferians, but they no longer mean Jachin Boaz Mahabon, as in the lodges, nor Jacques Bourguignon Malay, as with the Knights Kadosh. In theurgy, these three letters mean Jesus, Bethlehemitus Maledictus. Theurgy is therefore pure Satanism. Moreover, it is important to note that the Kabbalists admit to the mysteries of theurgy, never mention the word Satan. They look upon certain distant adepts who invoke the devil under the name of Satan as heretics, whose system they call Goti or black magic. They call their own practices theurgy or white magic. Between these two types of devil worshippers, the Luciferian occultists and the Satanists, there is a difference which must not be overlooked. Luciferians never call their infernal master spirit of evil or father and creator of crime. Albert Pike even forbade the use of the word Satan under any circumstances. There is indeed a distinction between the Satanists and the Luciferians. The Satanists, described by Mr. Huysmans in his book La Bosse, are chiefly persons mentally deranged by the use and abuse of drugs who, while suffering from a peculiar form of hysteria, accuse the God of the Christians of having betrayed the cause of humanity. There are persons who recognize that their god Satan occupies a position in the supernatural sphere inferior to that of the Christian deity. On the other hand, the Luciferians, or the initiates of kindred rites, while still laboring under a strange delusion, act deliberately and glorify Lucifer as the principle of good. To them, he is the equal of the God of Christians, whom they describe as the principle of evil. It is necessary to recognize the distinction which exists between Luciferians and Satanists, for their two cults bear each other no resemblance, although Lucifer's Satan manifests indiscriminately to his faithful followers of both denominations. One must not, however, imagine that the pride and satisfaction he derives from this adulation acts as an inducement to making him appear whether he is called. Occultists of the schools agree that nothing is more capricious than the conduct of spirits when evoked. It is well, moreover, to remember that Luciferian occultism is no novelty, nor must one make the mistake of confusing it with ordinary Freemasonry, the lodges of which are only private clubs. Many authors have published books on Freemasonry, some printing the rituals, some of their personal observations on certain facts, but few of these authors, having themselves passed into the occult masonry, the real masonry of the Kabbalistic degrees, which is in touch with all secret societies, Masonic as well as non-Masonic, have been able to state the Luciferian occultism controls Freemasonry. Though this is indeed the case, neither the president of the Council of the Order of the Grand Orient of France, the supreme chief of French Freemasonry, nor the president of the Supreme Council of Scottish Rites will be received at the meeting of a simple Luciferian ceremony just on account of his title and dignity, unless at the same time he possesses a diploma of Kabbalistic grade, which requires another initiation. On the other hand, the first odd fellow from Canada, a member of the Chinese San Ho Hu of China, a Luciferian fakir from India, all these can visit at their pleasure all lodges and inner shrines of ordinary Freemasonry in all countries, because in each one of the satanic sects the directing authority is exercised by heads who belong to the most exalted Masonic degrees of the different rites, degrees which are for them a secondary importance. These chiefs, at the request of their subordinates of the Luciferian societies, deliver to them freely the diplomas necessary to obtain admittance everywhere, as well as the sacred words and yearly and half-yearly passwords of all the Masonic rites of the globe. Luciferian occultism, as has been said before, is therefore not a novelty, but it bore a different name in the early days of Christianity. It was called Gnosticism, and its founder was Simon the Magician. The Gnostics were not ordinary heretics, but constituted an anti-Christian sect. To deceive the multitude, they affected disagreement with certain doctrines of the apostles, and the chiefs selected from among the initiates those who destined to receive in secret council the satanic revelation. Gnosticism is marked with the seal of Lucifer. It is contemporary with the Apostle Peter and has continued without interruption down to the present day, periodically changing its mask. The 7 founders of Freemasonry were all Gnostics, magi of the English Rose Croix. The 7 founders of Freemasonry were all Gnostics, magi of the English Rose Croix, whose names were Theophile de Salgers, named chaplain of the Prince of Wales by George II, Anderson, the clergyman, an Oxford graduate, the preacher to the King of England, George Payne, James King, Calvert, Ludman Madden, and Eliot. Gnosticism, as the mother of Freemasonry, has imposed its mark in the very center of the chief symbol of this association. The most conspicuous emblem which one notices on entering a Masonic temple, the one which figures on the seals, on the rituals, everywhere, in fact, appears in the middle of the interlaced square and compass. It is the five-pointed star framing the letter G. Different explanations of this letter G are given to the initiates. In the lower grades, one is taught that it signifies geometry. To the brothers frequenting the lodges admitting women as members, it is revealed that the mystic letter means generation, but the revelation is attended with great secrecy. Finally, T6, those found worthy to penetrate into the sanctuary of Knights Kadosh. The Ananitic letter becomes the initial of the doctrine of the perfect initiates, which is Gnosticism. This explanation is no longer an imaginary fabrication. It is Gnosticism, which is the real meaning of the G in the flamboyant star, for after the grade of Kadosh, a Hebrew word meaning consecrated, the Freemasons dedicate themselves to the glorification of Gnosticism, or anti-Christianity, which is defined by Albert Pike as the soul and marrow of Freemasonry. Let us add that the ancient mysteries of Gnosticism have been known and published in the past. There is no difference between the Gnosticism of the early ages of Christianity and modern occultism. The fundamental principle of Gnosticism was the double divinity dual principle, and this is exactly the theological theory of modern occultism. The Gnostics claimed that the good God was Lucifer and that Christ was the devil, that what the Christians call vice was for them virtue, and to the Christian, dogma, they opposed Gnosticism, a word meaning human knowledge. Early Gnosticism had its doctors, the Basilidians, Ophites, and Valentinians. Balside of Alexandria, one of them, lived at the end of the 1st century. He taught metempsychosis and the principles underlying present-day theosophy. His system resembled that of the Spiritists of the 19th century, who have invented nothing, for they copy Gnosticism even in its theory of the transmigration of souls. Basilide affirmed that he was the reincarnation of Plato. Whoever has penetrated into assemblies of modern theurgists can attest that one of its current theories is that of reincarnation. After Basilide came Montanus, who died in 212. Montanus was a grand master of the art of divination. The Bite of Mizraim, a Freemasonry said to be Egyptian, copies slavishly in its Kabbalistic grades all the phantasmagoria of Montanus. This Gnostic doctor plunged himself into ecstasies, and according to history, he had two women, Maximilia and Priscilla, trained to act as his accomplices. The Gnostics came in crowds to admire their contortions worthy of epileptics. They had the sacred illness and were considered two saints of Satan. In the assemblies of the sect, when they went into frenzies and prophesied their oractor sayings. Let me say it again. In the assemblies of the sect, when they went into frenzies and prophesied, their oracular sayings were listened to with veneration by the adepts. When they were acting a part, were they just mediums or somnambulists, or were they what the Roman Catholics called possessed? This is a hard question to answer. A modern example of the influence exercised by occult organizations on the destinies of mankind is to be found in the history of the Holy Alliance, founded in 1850 by Alexander I, Emperor of Russia. This was originally a union of monarchs pledged to support the Christian Church and to stem the rising tide of radicalism, revolution, and subversion. In La Histoire de la Magie, page 467, Eliphas Levi states that the priestess sect of the rescuers of Louis XVI, wishing to penetrate this organization to use it for their own purposes, succeeded in insinuating one of their lumens into the good graces of the Tsar. This was Madame Bouche, known to the adepts as Sister Salome. After 18 months spent at the Russian court, during which she had many secret interviews with the emperor, she was supplanted by another medium somnambulist of the sect, the famous Madame de Krudner, who acquired so great an influence over the Tsar that his ministers became alarmed at the situation thus created. Levi thus describes the fall of the favorite. One day, as the emperor was leaving her, she barred his passage, crying, "God reveals to me that your life is in great danger. An assassin is in the palace." The emperor, alarmed, caused the palace to be searched, and a man armed with a dagger was found. He confessed, when questioned, that he had been introduced into the palace by Madame de Krudner herself. One wonders if the whole affair was not simply the result of a clever intrigue calculated to get rid of the prophetess. As such, it was singularly successful, for Madame de Krudner was similarly banished from the Russian court. In Della Maconnery, Occulte, page 87-88, J.M. Ragone tells us that science counts the four kinds of somnambulism: the natural, the symptomatic, the magnetic, and the ecstatic. Natural and symptomatic somnambulism are two essentially different states, one occurring only at night, the other by day as well as by night. The conduct of the subject is different under the two conditions. Magnetic and ecstatic somnambulism differ from one another in so much as the one is commanded, willed, and the other is not. The first is artificial, the other natural. In the first, the subject is dependent. In the second, he acts independently. That is why induced somnambulism cures the natural when substituted for it. A lucid somnambulist bears no more resemblance to a man asleep than he does to an active man awake. Oh my God. When the Gnostics practiced magic, they evoked the spirits of the dead exactly as do the occultists of today. Dawning Christianity was prolific in miracles, so, in order to fight it, the disciples of Gnosticism had recourse to diabolical marvels. In this respect, are not contemporaneous spiritists, with their raping tables and apparitions, Gnostics under another name. Secret Gnostic meetings led to depravity, as the adepts indulge in every kind of turpitude and obscenity, often under the influence of drugs such as Indian hemp, cannabis indica, or opium, the medicinal properties of which, when administered under certain conditions, are provocative of mediumistic phenomena. Thus debauched, their moral sense weakened, initiates are ready to work. They work, they fall, and as they fall, the occult power grasps its prey. Their life henceforth is subject to the will of the hidden masters, who, according to their secret designs, will lead their slaves to power or a semblance of power, or else to their downfall. To use the words of Inquire Within in Light Bearers of Darkness, page 118, these masters, doubtless identical with the terrible power behind the horrors of Russia's sufferings and world revolution, have in reality no interest in soul or astral development, except as a means of forming passive illuminized tools completely controlled in mind and actions. Inquire Within further suggests that there is a group of flesh and boned men who can form etheric links from any distance with the leaders of these societies and who secretly work by means of that light which can slay or make alive, intoxicating, blinding, and, if need be, destroying unwary men and women, using them as instruments or light bearers to bring to pass this mad and evil scheme of world dominion by the God people, the Kabbalistic Jew. Oh. A further explanation of the phenomenon of induced mediumship is given us by the same author, who quotes the following lines from Eliphas Levi, History of Magic. This may take place when, through a series of almost impossible exercises, our nervous system, having been habituated to all tensions and fatigues, has become a kind of living galvanic pile capable of condensing and projecting powerfully that light astral which intoxicates and destroys. Inquire Within comments further. It attempts to show that it leads to mastership and self-control, but on careful consideration, it proves to be merely conscious mediumship inspired by crafty and willful deception, giving the adept a false confidence, inducing him to let go his physical senses and work upon the astral, where, enclosed by formula given by these masters themselves, he is completely at their mercy. A recent practical illustration of these methods is the teaching contained in a book, Asia Mysteriosa, by Zam Hotva, published by Dorban Annie, which suggests ways and means of communication with the hidden masters. It will be recognized by anyone having taken an interest in the progress of science along certain lines that there is nothing impossible or even improbable in the suggestion of telepathy, in the suggestion that telepathy may be exploited by organizations for their own particular ends. 40 years ago, William Gray Hudson wrote on telepathy as follows: "If the power exists in man to convey a telepathic message to his fellow man, it presupposes the existence of the power in the recipient to repeat the message to a third person, and so on indefinitely until someone receives it who has the power to elevate the information above the threshold of his consciousness, and thus convey it to the objective intelligence of the world. Nor is the element of time necessarily an adverse factor in the case, for there is no reason to suppose that such messages may not be transmitted from one to another for generations. Thus, the particulars of a tragedy might be revealed many years after the event, and in such a way as to render it difficult, if not impossible, to trace the line through which the intelligence was transmitted. For the spiritist, the easy and ever-ready explanation of such a phenomenon is to ascribe it to the intervention of spirits of the dead. But to those who have kept pace with the developments of modern scientific investigation and who are able to draw legitimate and necessary conclusions from the facts discovered, the explanation is obvious without the necessity of entering the domain of the supernatural. On the subject of hypnotism and crime, Hudson, writing further, reaches, however, a fatally false conclusion, which for many years remained unchallenged. He states, page 140, "It is true that on ordinary questions, the truth is always uppermost in the subjective mind. A hypnotic subject will often say during the hypnotic sleep that which he would not say in his waking moments. Nevertheless, he never betrays a vital secret. That this is true is presumptively proved by the fact that in all the years during which the science of hypnotism has been practiced, no one has ever been known to betray the secrets of any society or order. The attempt has often been made, but it has never succeeded." Hudson attributes this reticence to autosuggestion, opposing the suggestion of another. This, however, is not the case, for where a member of a secret society or order is concerned, that member was already hypnotized during initiation, and it is not his will that guards the secret. Ooh, it is the will of another, the will of the lodge. How many people know that hypnotism is all about, or is about all there is to initiation? Hypnotism and fear, the rest is camouflage. In the event of this statement being doubted, we quote herewith from Freemasonry Universal, an article which needs no further comment. The stewards prepare the candidate. The Tyler first, and afterwards, in turn, the IG deacons and junior wardens should inspect the candidate to see that everything is strictly correct. The preparation symbolizes poverty, blindness, or ignorance, and poverty of spirit, but it may also signify a purification, i.e., that the riches and pleasures which bind one to the material side of life are discarded, and the spirit blinded to their attractions. The bearing of the right arm, left breast, left knee, and right heel being slipshod are apparently a reference to the awakening of occult sentries in one's being, which may only become active when purification of the whole nature has begun. The very specific character of the preparation points to real knowledge of the occult's physiology of the process of initiation on the part of those who originated the method which has been so faithfully preserved. Certain forces are sent through the candidate's body during the ceremony, especially at the moment when he is created, received, and constituted and entered apprentice Freemason. Certain parts of the lodge have been very heavily charged with magnetic force, especially in order that the candidate may absorb as much as possible of this force. The first object of the curious method of preparation is to expose to this influence those various parts of the body which are especially used in the ceremony. In ancient Egypt, there was another reason for these preparations, for a weak current of physical electricity was sent through the candidate by means of a rod or sword with which he was touched at certain points. It is partially on this account that at this first initiation the candidate is deprived of all metals, since they may very easily interfere with the flow of the currents. All kinds of nice, inspiring, symbolical interpretations of the ritual are generally given for the benefit of people who seem to want them, but it is here evident that the candidate, unknown to himself or herself, has acted throughout the ceremony of initiation under the stress of hypnotism. No longer a free agent, the initiate takes the oath under hypnotic force, which has also been used to instill into him the feeling of fear. Fear guards the secret of the initiation, fear born under the power of hypnotism to serve henceforth as the controlling agent of the initiators over the initiated. The right worshipful master must be a genuine occultist, as it is up to him to hypnotize the candidate. For to give this, in the words of Freemasonry Universal, the RWM gives the light, the pure white light of truth and illumination. Ooh, the illumination, alias Kundalini, alias serpent power, alias electromagnetic force, alias the sex force, etc. Even in our Western world, anyone wishing to study Hatha Yoga can learn to neutralize the action of gravity and go some yards up in the air. This stunt and the assumption of any size at will are tricks for which training is essential, and if one works at it hard enough, one will eventually be able to mesmerize people for one's own purpose, business, political, or other, thus following the lure of the occult to a sinister end, i.e. black magic. In Hinduism, it is known as Kali Yoga. Here observe that the miracles performed by Jesus Christ bore a distinctive feature, often overlooked, namely that in every case altruism was the source of their inspiration. Thus they were a symbol of charity. This gives us the esoteric explanation of his silence when taunted on the cross. He saved others, himself he cannot save. Sooner than use his power for personal advantage, he chose death. Gnostic miracles, such as that of being buried alive for a period of time, which constitutes the Hindu religious rites of samadhi, have no ulterior charitable purpose. They are chiefly performed for the object of creating wonderment, curiosity, or faith in magic, and as such, failing the altruistic motive, are classifiable under the general term of black magic. As a stimulus to popular faith, they are, however, sanctioned by most pagan religions, though where such a custom prevails, the magical performers themselves are not privileged to withhold their gains for themselves, as these are claimed by the temple. Having dealt with the preliminaries of the subject, we will now proceed along the thorny paths of history, not the history of wars, battles, heroes, but that of the agents of their being. Heavy. That's it. That's all I'm doing today. Chapter 3 is Brahmanism. Zoroastrianism. Going? That's good. All right. Well, the origin of Mazdaism seems shrouded in mystery. One may nevertheless recognize its antiquity, probably the same as that of the Rig Veda, for it has been proved by Eugene Bornoff the Spiegel that certain parts of the Avesta are as old as the Rig, and the many similarities of this religion with that of the Vedas proves that Mazdaism must have had its origin at the time when the Aryans undertook the conquest of India, that is to say 17 to 18 centuries before our era. From La Mazdamesi, or Mazdami, La Vesta of G. de la Font, we extract the following facts. The historic role of media began with Awakashatara, a name written by the Greeks. Kyaxares, the founder of the Median Empire. After defeating the Scythians, Kyaxares went to Assyria, where he laid siege to Nineveh, after the destruction of which the Assyrian Empire came to an end, 612 BC. Kyaxares left a son, Astage, whose daughter Mandane married the Persian Cambrys, and from their union sprang the great Cyrus, the founder of the Persian Empire. The Parthian dynasty of the Arsacids, who reigned from 526 BC until 226 AD, marks a fatal period for Mazdaism. It was only on the ascension of Ardhanishir Babijane, the founder of the Assanide dynasty, that Mazdaism regained its strength. With Adeshir, Mazdaism became the state religion, and Shapur II caused all the Avesta texts treating of philosophy, medicine, cosmogony, and astronomy to be collected. Under the last Sassanids appeared several heretical sects, the most celebrated of which were those of Mainz and of Mazdek. However, in the 7th century came the Arab conquest. With Yezdergurt, the Persian Empire of the Sassanids disappeared, and with it the influence of Mazdaism. Towards the 10th century, a few thousand Persians faithful to the old cult went into exile, taking with them their laws and altars. Some of these took refuge in the Kerman, in the Yezd, while the others fled to India, where they now constitute the well-known sect of the Parsis. The Zendavesta, the sacred book of Persia and of the modern Parsis, contains the teaching of Zoroaster, Thura, a reformer said to have lived some 7,000 years before Christ. It was first translated into French by Hyacinth, damn these names, Hyacinth Equatil de Perron in 1761. The Chevalier de Ramsay, giving Plutarch as his authority, says, Zoroaster taught that there are two gods contrary to each of their operations, in their operations. The one, the author of all the good, and the other of all the evil in nature. The good principle he calls Aurora Mazda. That's cool. The other, the demon Aramenus, Agramenius. He says that the one resembles light and truth, the other darkness and ignorance. There is likewise a middle god between these two named Mithras, whom the Persians call the intersector or mediator. Mithras is the Yazata, spirit of light and the guardian of justice and truth. For the benefit of the reader, we compile the following interesting information from the previously mentioned author G. de la Font. Pure Zoroastrianism was monotheistic, for in the beginning Ahura Mazda was recognized as infinitely more power than Agra Manius. Thus, dualism, or the potential equality of these two deities, was actually the development of a later corruption of the Zoroastrian teaching. The Avesta, the Bible of Mazdaism, containing the revelations of Ahura Mazda to the prophet Zoroaster, is composed of two principal parts. The Avesta, containing the Vanidad, the Yaknaka, and the Vespered, and the Korada Avesta, Little Avesta, is composed of 6 parts. Mazdianism taught the immortality of the soul and compensating justice in another world of heaven or hell, the resurrection of the body, the last judgment, and the freedom of the soul to choose between right and wrong as a free agent, as opposed to the Islamic theory of fatalism. Oromazes is the universal creator of all that is good, eternal. He created the good genie, the spiritual and material world. Man is his creature, and at the end of time he will resurrect him to endow him with eternal happiness, and will cause the powers of evil and evil itself to vanish from the earth. No cult is rendered to Agra Manius, Lucifer, who, with his devas, evil spirits, fights Ahura Mazda, God, through the ages. Fire in the Mazdian religion was worshipped as the luminous and pure element, the work of Ahura Mazda, and for that reason always burns sheltered from defilement. But it is not material fire that in this case is to be considered as the Yazata. The Avesta distinguishes several kinds of fire. God, these names. 1. Barizakavana, or eternal fire of the earth. 2. Zohu Phrayana, or fire of the human body and animals. Kundalini, sex force, serpent power. 3. Urvista, or fire of vegetation. 4. Vasista, or fire of lightning. 5. Penista, of fire of Ahura Mazda, represented by the fire on the altar. The Fravishes, modern Frorers, are supposed to be the souls of the dead defiled. Their cult also forms the basis of the ancestor worship of the Pitris of India and the Manes of Latin countries. According to Geiger, by Fravishus must be understood the immortal divine part in man, which unites with the body for a limited time only. Consequently, the Fravishus of those who are dead, of those who are living, and of those who are still unborn. Darmstrater further explains that the Fravishas are the spiritual form of a being independent of its material life and interior to it. According to Mazdean teaching, Oromaz offered to the furors of men the choice of remaining in the spiritual world or of descending on earth to incarnate in human bodies. At the advent of death, corpses were supposed immediately to become the prey of the demon dirge Nakas, the demon of impurity of corpses, thus it being most essential never to allow the elements of fire, water, and earth to be sullied by contact with anything unclean. The funeral rites and ceremonies of the Mazdians differ from those of other religions. Their ancient customs persist today among the Parsis of India, where the bodies of the dead are carried to the Towers of Silence, there to be exposed and devoured by the birds of prey. Besides the many other parallels between Mazdaism and Christianity, the deity of the Mazdeans, their personal god, Ahura Mazda, was not a god of vengeance, as was the Jehovah of the Jews. He was the essence of universal love, charity, justice, and activity, and the ideal of Mazdian virtue in early times was similar to that of the Christians of today. Jainism, which, like Buddhism, denies the authority of the Vedas and is therefore regarded by the Brahmins of India as heretical, may have been founded by Parsava, whose death is placed at 250 years before that of Vardhamana Mahavira, the last of the prophets of the Jains and contemporary with Buddha. Vardhamana Mahavira died at the age of 72 at Parva 527 BC. He had 11 disciples to whom he preached the law. Many authorities, however, believe the Jain church to be as old as Brahmanism itself. The following paragraph, quoted from Hastings' Encyclopedia of Religions and Ethics article on Jainism, describes the Jain theory of the transmigration of souls as opposed to the orthodox theory of reincarnation. It is here referred to as a peculiarity of the Jains which had struck all observers more than any other, viz., their extreme carefulness not to destroy any living being, a principle which is carried out to its very last consequences in monastic life, and has shaped the conduct of the laity in a great measure. No layman will intentionally kill any living being, not even an insect, however troublesome. He will remove it carefully without hurting it. It goes without saying that the Jains are strict vegetarians. This principle of not hurting any living being bars them from some professions, e.g. agriculture, as has thrust them into commerce and especially into the least elevating branch of money lending. Most of the money lending in Western India is in the hands of the Jains, and this accounts in a great measure both for their unpopularity and for their wealth. A remarkable institution of the Jains, due to their tender regard for animal life, is their asylums for old and diseased animals, the Panajarapalas, where they are kept and fed till they die a natural death. The reluctance on the part of an Orthodox Jain to discourage vermin on the theory that a louse may actually be his reincarnated grandmother or scorpion, some other reincarnated relative, is only a logical development of his religious belief in the transmigration of souls. The Jains are subdivided today into numerous schools, each following the teachings of a certain master, but united in certain fundamental beliefs. All right. Gotta play that song before. There's like 3 books I'm doing, and I post it out live as I'm doing them or whatever. And if I don't do that before these 3 books, well, I cut off part of my readings. I'm not always going to explain this to who's ever listening, if there's anybody, But I thought I would take the time right now to let you know that. When I'm reading, I'm usually pretty serious about it. It's tough. I got to pay attention. Anyways, chapter 5, Confucianism and Taoism. Hold on, give me one moment. Holy shit. This is a short one. Maybe I'll read 2. I doubt it. I'm just going to read 1. I'll tell you how long I've been going. I'm going an hour and some fucking time. This one's going to be a short one. Chapter 5, Confucianism and Taoism. Previous to the Christian era, China, judging from the available annals, presented the spectacle of a country whose social life was based almost solely on what might be called the family cult, the metaphysical tradition overshadowing the life of the people, leading to the monotheistic belief in a supreme being, was the knowledge and belief of a few. Vaguely, the people believed in the monarch alone held communication with the sublime sovereign of God. The rites had nothing of a religious character. They were purely social. Then, in 1122 BC, when the Chinese dynasty of Changyin was overthrown by the Zhou, there were introduced in China numerous innovations, most of them pertaining to magic and occultism. Also, Brahmanistic and Avestic dogmas and beliefs. The whole construction of social ideology in China had undergone a slow but radical change. The ground was prepared for the pantheistic teaching of the philosopher Lao Tse, whose doctrine was bitterly fought by Confucius, 551 to 479, who opposed the dualistic theory and strove to regenerate the former state of Chinese social life, the cult of the family and ancestors. It's hard for me to read like that. So, I mean, I know it might make, I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I got to read it the way I read it so that it makes sense to me. Moreover, the whole moral code of Confucius was contained in a few words: loyalty and good feeling towards one neighbor. Only about 65 AD was Buddhism introduced in China, followed in turn by Mazdaism, Manchanism, and Mohammedanism. I'm going to read Egyptian esotericism too, because Judaism is a longer one. So I want to get through that. I want to get through Egyptian esotericism. Yeah, don't worry. Chapter 6. More than any other country, ancient Egypt was an illustration of theocratic power. There, priesthood ruled and adumbrated royalty. Depositaries of the Indo-Iran tradition of Ra, Zoroastria, and Manu, the priests of Thebes and Memphis, made of Egypt the fortress of antique esotericism. The sovereign lord, god, and teacher bore the name of Hermes or Thoth, the great initiator. In him were typified the 3 great powers of royalty, law-giving or legislative, and high priesthood, which made the Greeks, disciples of the Egyptians, surname him Hermes Trismegistus, or thrice great. To Hermes was credited a large number of books containing the secrets of Indo-Aryan occult science. Fire was the first principle, the basis of all teaching, and the law of Amun-Ra, the sun god of Thebes. Only after the conquest of Egypt by the Hyksos, 2000 BC, did the priests spread among the people the cult of Osiris and Isis and their son Horus. This popular religion served as a screen which most effectively shielded the hermetic mysteries from the intrusion and disclosure, and safeguarded ancient and Aryan esotericism, which had to fear annihilation at the hands of the priesthood of the Black or Ethiopian race, whose esotericism was based upon a different conception of occult and psychic knowledge. A striking example of the rivalry of the two esoteric schools is given in the Bible when Moses and Aaron, practicing the magic taught them by the Ethiopian Jethro, failed to confound the Egyptian priests before Pharaoh. Concealed behind the popular cult of Osiris and Isis was the soul of an Egyptian esotericism which no one could reach except after having been deemed worthy to penetrate the most sacred mysteries of Isis, whose statue, with its face veiled, stood before the door of the Temple of Occultism. The trials of initiation which a candidate had to withstand before he beheld the light of Osiris and understood the vision of Hermes were long and terrible. They were interspersed, however, by states of trance induced by special beverages, during which the initiate had voluptuous visions of Isis preceded by the five-pointed flamboyant star or the rose of Isis. Two great flowing currents issued from the esoteric wisdom, jealousy safeguarded by the Egyptians, namely Mosaism or Judaism, taught by Moses, whose god was Jehovah, and Orpheism, taught by Orpheus, whose god was Zeus or Jupiter. The former adapted his beliefs to suit the mentality of undisciplined, rebellious masses of Israelites in Egypt, hence a god of fear and vengeance. The later legislated for a people whose Hellenic genius touched the sublime heights of philosophic wisdom on the one hand, and sought on the other to carry its irrepressible sense of beauty and lightheartedness in its pursuit of material pleasures. Hence the great difference between the two currents which have derived their initial teaching from the same source. Damn! That sounds pretty cool. Yeah, chapter 8 is Judaism, the Pharisees. Anyways, chapter 7, Judaism, the Pharisees. Going good. Judaism has been described by Moses Mendelssohn, a learned Jew, in this way. Judaism is not a religion, but a law religionized. This definition does away effectively with the erroneous belief prevalent among the non-Jews that Judaism is a religion. In spite of the loud and frequent assertions made by Jews and Christian divines alike, contending that the Jews were the first monotheists, it is a well-proven fact that the high initiates of the Memphis priesthood were monotheists long before the Jews ever went to Egypt. Judaism would be best described as a rite or compendium of rites, for if one lends belief to the existence of the Jewish lawgiver, Moses, one must bear in mind that he first studied among the high initiates of Egypt and later became the pupil and son-in-law of Black Jethro, the Ethiopian magician whom one might call the father of voodooism, name given to the magic practices and rites performed by the Negroes. The closer one studies the history of the Jews, the clearer it appears that they are neither a religious entity nor a nation. The absolute failure of Zionism, which was a desperate effort on the part of certain Jewish leaders to bind all the Jews of the world into a national entity whose territory would have been Palestine, proves the futility of such an effort. Judaism is not a religion, and the Jews are not a nation, but they are a sect with Judaism as a rite. The obligations and rules of the rite for the Jewish masses are contained in the Talmud and Shulchan Aruch, but the esoteric teachings for the higher initiates are to be found in the Kabbalah. Therein are contained the mystery rites for the evocations, the indications and keys to practices for conjuration of supernatural forces, the science of numbers, astrology, etc. The practical application of the Kabbalist knowledge is manifested in the use made of it through the ages by Jews to gain influence both in the higher spheres of the Gentile life and over the masses. Sovereigns and popes both usually had one or more Jews as astrologers and advisors, and they frequently gave Jews control over their very life by employing them as physicians. Political power was thus gained by Jews in almost every Gentile country alongside with financial power, since Jewish court bankers manipulated state funds and taxes. Through the ages also can be followed the spreading power of the sect, and no more awful example of the devastating and destructive power of the penetration of the secret subversive society has ever been witnessed. With its B'nai B'rith Supreme Council as the directing head, the sect with its members swarming among all nations has become the sovereign power ruling in the councils of all nations and governing their political, economic, religious, and educational policies. In his book, Nicholas II et les Juifs, Nekdovoldovo explains that the Chaldean science acquired by many of the Jewish priests during the captivity of Babylon gave birth to the sect of the Pharisees whose names only appear in the Holy Scriptures and in the writings of the Jewish historians after the captivity. 606 BC. The works of the celebrated scientist Monk leave no doubt on the point that the sect appeared during the period of the captivity. From then dates the Kabbalah or tradition of the Pharisees. For a long time, their precepts were only transmitted orally, but later they formed the Talmud and received their final form in the book called the Sefer HaZohar. The Pharisees were, as it were, a class whose tendency was to form a kind of intellectual aristocracy among the Jews. At first, they formed a sort of brotherhood, a Habara, the members being called Habarim, or brothers. They were a subversive element aiming at the overthrow of the Sadducean high priesthood, whose members prided themselves on the aristocracy of blood and birth, to which the Pharisees opposed an aristocracy of learning. The war waged by the latter extends over a long period of time, and the rivalry was bitter. The Pharisees, who, although they professed as one of their chief tenets the utmost contempt of the Amaharetz, or simple people, did not overlook the fact that they needed their mass support for the attainment of their own aim, and they enlisted it by opposing the Sadducean strictness of the law in many instances, namely in the observance of the Sabbath. The power of the Sadducees fell with the destruction of the temple by Titus, and thenceforth the Pharisaic element held supremacy among the Jews. Quoting an acknowledged authority on Judaism, Mr. Flavian Branier, Lieutenant General Nekvolodo, further describes the policy of the sect as follows. Before appearing proudly as an expression of Jewish aspirations, the tradition of the Pharisees had serious difficulties to surmount, the chief of which was the rival of the Orthodox faith stimulated in the Jewish people by the captivity. To the exiles bemoaning the fall of the Temple of Jerusalem and begging Jehovah to end the misfortunes of their homeland, the revelation that Jehovah was only a phantom entailed not only certain defeat, but also their own exposure to perils, the least of which would have been the loss of all authority over Israel. The Pharisees then, judging it wiser to capture the confidence of their compatriots by taking the lead of the religious movement, affected a scrupulous observance of the slightest prescriptions of the law, and instituted the practice of complicated rituals, simultaneously, however, cultivating the new doctrine in their secret sanctuaries. These were regular secret societies composed during the captivity of a few hundred adepts. At the time of Flavius Josephus, which was that of their greatest prosperity, they numbered only some 6,000 members. This group of intellectual pantheists was soon to acquire a directing influence over the Jewish nation. Nothing, moreover, likely to offend national sentiment ever appeared in their doctrines. However, saturated with pantheistic Chaldeanism, they might have been, the Pharisees preserved their ethnic pride intact. This religion of man divinized, which they had absorbed at Babylon, they conceive solely as applying to the profit of the Jew, the superior and predestined being. The promises of universal dominion, which the Orthodox Jew found in the law, the Pharisees did not interpret in the sense of the reign of the God of Moses over the nations, but in that of a material domination to the imposed on the universe by the Jews. Yes, let me reread that. I like that. The promise of universal dominion, which the Orthodox Jew found in the law, the Pharisees did not interpret in the sense of the reign of the God of Moses over the nations, but in that of a material domination to a imposed on the universal by the Jews. The awaited Messiah was no longer the redeemer of original sin, a spiritual victor who would lead the world. It was a temporal king, bloody with battle, who would make Israel master of the world and drag all peoples under the wheels of his chariot. The Pharisees did not ask this enslavement of the nations of a mystical Jehovah, which they continued worshiping in public, only as a concession to popular opinion, for they expected its eventual consummation to be achieved by the secular patience of Israel and the use of human means. Monstrously different from the ancient law were such principles as these, but they had nothing one could see which might have rendered unpopular those who let them filter, drop by drop, among the Jews. The admirably conceived organization of the Pharisees did not fail soon to bear fruit. One cannot better define its action in the midst of Jewish society before Jesus Christ. And Mr. Flavian Bernier then... these words are old. These are hard ones to string together for me. That's all right. We'll try it again. One cannot better define its action in the midst of Jewish society before Jesus Christ, said Mr. Flavian Bernier, than in comparing it with that of the Freemasons in modern society. A carefully restricted membership, tightly bound, imposing on their members the religion of the secret. The Pharisees pursued relentlessly their double aim, which was 1. The seizure of political power by the possession of the great political offices, the influence of which was tremendous in the reconstituted Jewish nation, and the conquest of the Sanhedrin, Jewish parliament. 2. To modify gradually the conceptions of the people in the direction of their secret doctrine. The first of these aims was achieved when Hillel, a Pharisee of Babylon who claimed Davidic descent, was elected president of the Sanhedrin. Thus ended the bitter fight between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Opposed to Hillel was Shammai, a Sadducee, supporter of the Sadducean high priest, who was made chief judge of the assembly. The attitude of the two men towards each other is a matter of long record in the Talmud. Among the most noted Pharisees after Hillel are Yochanan ben Zakkai, founder of the school of Yamani, Aqaba, who, with Bar Kokhba, fomented the revolt against the Romans under Hadrian, rebellion ending with the order of the dispersion of the Jews, 132 A.D., with the order for the... Fomented the revolt against the Romans under Hadrian, rebellion ending with the order of the dispersion of the Jews in 132 A.D. Also, Simon ben Yoli, who might be termed the great magician and father of the Kabbalah. Lastly, Judah, the prince who compiled the Babylonian Talmud. Under these chiefs, the Pharisaic power was definitely established in the Sanhedrin. Those among the Jews who clung to the Sadducean tradition or refused to acknowledge the dominion of the Pharisees remained as dissidents. Such were the Samaritans and the Karaites, who rejected the Talmud. The second of the aims of its method of attainment is exposed in the so-called protocols of the wise men of Zion, who loudly denounced by the descendants of those who devised the secret doctrine in Israel Israel, here meaning the Jews as a religious community, most of whom remain quite ignorant of the intricate subversive schemes imputed to them. The attitude of Jesus Christ to this sect is definitely expressed in the New Testament. See Luke 11 and John 8. Exoteric Judaism, the Jewish religion as practiced in the 20th century, is based on the Old Testament and on equally ancient commentaries on it, preserved for ages as oral traditions and known as above stated under the general name of the Talmud. All copies of this book were ordered to be burned by Philip IV the Fair, King of France, in 1306, but the book survived the Holocaust. We know that the Jewish God is not the father of all men and the ideal of love, justice, and mercy, like the Christian God or even like Amar Mazda or Brahma. On the contrary, he is the God of vengeance down to the fourth generation, just and merciful only to his own people, but foe to all other nations, denying them human rights and commanding their enslavement that Israel might appropriate their riches and rule over them. Welcome to 2024. The following quotations will serve to illustrate this point. And when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor shew mercy unto them. Deuteronomy 7:2. For thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord of thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself above all people that are upon the face of the earth. Deuteronomy 7:6. The Talmud comments upon it. You are human beings, but the nations of the world are not human beings, but beasts. Baba Mecca 1146. On the house of the Goy, on the house of the Goy, non-Jews, one looks as on the fold of cattle. Tesiphan Ebron 8. From the Talmud, a prayer said on the eve of Passover to the present day. We beg thee, O Lord, indict thy wrath on the nations not believing in thee and not calling on thy name. Let down thy wrath on them and inflict them with thy wrath. Drive them away thy wrath and crush them into pieces. Take away, O Lord, all bone from them. In a moment indict all disbelievers. Destroy in a moment all foes of thy nation. Draw out with the root, disperse and ruin unworthy nations. Destroy them. Destroy them immediately in this very moment. Something Pranjaditas, Christianis, Talmudis, Judeo quotations. I don't care. I think it's all from the Talmud. When one sees inhabited houses of the Goy, one says, the Lord will destroy the house of the proud. And when one sees them destroyed, he says, the Lord God of vengeance has revealed himself. Babylonian Talmud, Barakot. All right. Those who do not own Torah and the prophets must be killed. Who has power to kill them, let him be killed. Hey, let me say this really, really good. I like this is juicy. Not juicy. This is spicy. Those who do not own Torah and the prophets must all be killed. Who has power to kill them, let him kill them openly with the sword. If not, let him use artifices till they are done away with. Makes complete sense why people don't trust that fucking book, doesn't it? You know which book I'm talking about. Not the fucking and not just the Talmud. That's a pretty easy one to fucking dismiss. The Jewish sages soon understood that Christ's way of commenting upon the old law introduced, instead of hatred towards foreign nations, brotherly feelings and equality of all men in the face of God, thus denying the Jews their privileged position as masters of the world. At the same time, Christ reforming the very primitive and rough moral ideas of the Old Testament deprived the Jews of their very covenant in the battle of life's unscrupulous double morality. Thence the Jewish hatred for the Christian faith is conspicuous in the following quotations from Talmudic sources. In the estates of the Goys are like wilderness, who first settles in them has a right to them. The property of the Goys is like a thing without a master. If a Jew has struck his spade into the ground of the Goy, he has become the master of the whole. In order to enhance the authority of the Old Testament, equally recognized by the Christians, while simultaneously augmenting that of the Talmud and the rabbis, its commentators and authors teach, in the law, the Bible, are things more or less important, but the words of the learned of the Scripture are always important. It is more wicked to protest the words of the rabbis than of Torah. Who changes the words of the rabbis ought to die. The decisions of the Talmud are words of the living God. Jehovah himself asks the opinion of earthly rabbis when there are difficult affairs in heaven. Jehovah himself in heaven studies the Talmud, standing. He has such respect for that book. To enhance the dignity of religion's dogmas, the following commandments are given. That the Jewish nation is the only nation selected by God, while all the remaining ones are contemptible and hateful. That all property of other nations belongs to the Jewish nation, which consequently is entitled to seize upon it without any scruples. That an Orthodox Jew is not bound to observe principles of morality towards people of other nations, and, on the contrary, he even ought to act against morality if it were profitable for himself or for the interest of Jews in general. You people and your fucking organized religions, dude. You're all fucking gross. All of them. I don't give a shit. A Jew may rob a goy. Goy means unclean and is the disparaging name for a non-Jew. He may cheat him over a bill which should not be perceived by him, otherwise the name of God will become dishonored. Should a goy to whom a Jew owed some money die without his heirs knowing about the debt, the Jew is not bound to pay the debt. The son of Noah who would steal a fatherling ought to be put to death, but an Israelite is allowed to do injury to a goy, where it is written, "Thou shalt not do injury to thy neighbor." It is not said, "Thou shalt not do injury to the goy." A thing lost by a goy may not only be kept by the man who found it, but it is forbidden to give it back to him, who took an oath in the presence of the goys. The robbers and the custom house officer is not responsible. In order to annul marriages, oaths, and promises, a Jew must go to the rabbi, and if he is absent, he must call 3 other Jews, and they say to them that he is sorry to have done it, and they say, "Thou art allowed to." The kol nidder prayer on the day of judgment that acquits beforehand for the non-fulfillment of all kinds of oaths and vows is given here. All vows, oaths, promises, engagements, and swearing which, beginning this very day of reconciliation, we intend to vow, promise, swear, and bind ourselves to fulfill, we are sorry for already, and they shall be annulled, acquitted, annihilated, abolished, valueless, unimportant. Our vows shall be no vows, and our oaths no oaths at all. If a goy wants a Jew to stand witness against a Jew at the court of law, and the Jew could give fair evidence, he is forbidden to do it. But if a Jew wants a Jew to be a witness in a similar case against a goy, he may do it. Should a Jew inform the goyish authorities that another Jew has much money and the other will suffer a loss through it, he must give him remuneration. If there is no doubt that someone thrice betrayed the Jews or caused that their money pass to the goys, a means and wise counsel must be found to do away with him. Everyone must contribute to the expense of the community, kahal, in order to do away with the traitor. It is permitted to kill a Jewish denuncier everywhere. It is permitted to kill him before he has denounced, though it is necessary to warn him and say, "Do not denounce." But should he say, "I will denounce," he must be killed, and he who accomplishes it first will have the greater merit. How to interpret the word robbery. A goy is forbidden to steal, rob, or take women slaves, etc. from a goy or from a Jew, but he, a Jew, is not forbidden to do all this to a goy. If a goy killed a goy or a Jew, he is responsible, but if a Jew killed a goy, he is not responsible. These all read like fucking laws that kids in a playground would write, arguing with each other. Like the prefrontal cortex hasn't evolved in any of this shit. All of it. God damn. I mean, seems like Talmudic Moses fucking bullshit is really bad. You know, like it's like the coarsest example of holy shit so far. I have never read anything on Islam or anything, but this one seems to take the cake in my eyes. But wow, how far we've come as a society. The authors of the Talmud, having issued this horrible moral code that acquits all kinds of crimes in order to make easier the strife with foreigners to their own nation, understood the necessity of keeping its contents a secret and thus legislated. To communicate anything to a goy without our religious relations would be equal to the killing of all the Jews, for if the goys knew what we teach about them, they would kill us openly. No shit. Stop being assholes. Maybe you wouldn't fucking be so worried. It is forbidden to disclose the secrets of the law. He who would do it would be as guilty as if he destroyed the whole world. The restrictions and the commandments bearing this in view were raised to the dignity of dogmas of faith. It is not astonishing that in face of such prohibitions, the secrets of the Talmud have been so little known to other nations, especially to the Western ones. Until the present day, even the most progressive and citizen-like Jews think the disclosure of the principles of the Talmud a proof of the most outrageous intolerance and an attack on the Jewish religion. In order to separate the Jewish nation from all others and thus prevent it mixing with them and losing their national peculiarities, a great many precepts of the ritual and rules for everyday life, prejudices and superstitions, the remainder of the times of barbarism and obscurity have been gathered in the Talmud and consecrated as canons. The precepts observed by Eastern Jews till the present day deride even the most simple notions of culture and hygiene. For instance, they enjoin, if a Jew be called to explain any part of the rabbinic books, he only ought to give a false explanation, that he might not, by behaving differently, become an accomplice in betraying this information. Who will violate this order shall be put to death. Liber David 37. It is forbidden to disclose the secrets of the law. One should and must make false oath when the goys ask if our books contain anything against them. Then we are bound to state an oath that there is nothing like it. Every goy who studies Talmud and every Jew who helps him on it ought to die. The ears of the goys are filthy, their baths, houses, countries are filthy. A goy boy or a boy goy after 9 years and 1 day old, and a girl after 3 years and 1 day old are considered filthy. These principles afford an explanation of the action of governments in excluding Jews from judicial and military positions. They also explain that mysterious phenomenon known as anti-Semitism. In this Manual of Freemasonry, Richard Carlile makes the following observations. The disposition of the mistaken Jew is to monopolize his portion of the sacred scripture as a charm or benefit prepared and presented to his people in their sectarian character. That there was no such nation as the Israelites is a truth, found in the consideration that they are not mentioned beyond the Bible in any records whatever. Egypt knew them not, Persia knew them not, Hindostan knew them not, Scythia knew them not, Phoenicia knew them not, Greece knew them not as a nation. And in the first general notice that we have of the Jews, they are introduced to the world as a sect, or a series of sects, being Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes. And in that general notice, beyond that sort of mistaken allegorical history which Josephus has copied from the books of the Old Testament, and which is not otherwise corroborated, and no better authority than the book of the Old Testament, there is no presentation of the Jews as the descendants of a larger nation of Israelites, as a religious or philosophical sect of distinction mixed up with and found in real human history. They are not to be traced higher than the century before the Christian era. It is satisfactory to be able to show the origin of anything, for such a knowledge is a common passion and curiosity among mankind. And I think the Reverend Robert Taylor has discovered and developed the origin of the titles of Hebrew, Israelite, and Jew. Hebrew, Israelite, and Jew are Cyrenaic, Phoenician, and Egyptian terms used in the mysterious degrees. And it would be as reasonable to argue that the Freemasons are a dispersed nation as that the Jews are or were a dispersed nation. The Reverend Mr. Taylor has beautifully explained this in his discourses. The scenes and characters of the mysterious drama as found in the Eleusinian orgies of Greece were Eleusis, the advent or coming in light, the birth and character of the subject of the drama, the title of the whole play or mystery, a hierophant, the expounder of the mysteries, the high priest, the pope, the archbishop, the huparite, the minister or ordinary priest, diakonos, the deacon or lower officer, diadokochos, the torchbearer, phantomagogue, the bringer of the light, autopotos, the candidate admitted to see the sight, the visitor of the temple, the church, and chapel goer. Autopsy, the higher self. Hebrew, the initiated candidate who has passed through all the degrees of the mystery. Teleos, the adept or perfected. Israelite, God-seer, purified from all guile. Jew, the God himself, or the mysterious perfection of deification of the human character. The whole type of what may be made of human nature by cultivation of mind, which is the conditional promise of paradise or kingdom of heaven. This is the revelation of all the mysteries. So it's all it's it, dude. That's it. All this shit is just a never mind. Carlyle further states, we are prepared with historical disproofs of the existence of such a people as Israelites or Jews as a nation. They were a religious or philosophical sect who had been made adepts in the higher pagan mysteries, a sect among nations, but not a nation among sects. Judaism sanctions Gnosticism, which is further elaborated in their books of the Kabbalah. For further study on this subject, we refer the reader to chapter, looks like 14. Cool. Chapter 9 will be Orpheism and the pagan mysteries. That's it. Yeah. What a crazy... Just... People are fucking weird, man. Center my cheese. Chapter 8, Orphism and the Pagan Mysteries. Page 90. There is no greater or more erudite authority than Fabre Olivet, 1768 to 1825, on Orpheus of Dionysus. And to such an eminent source, among many others, must the reader be referred. The feats of the white Dorian race of Greece and the mysticism of the priests of Thrace, as well as the centuries-long rivalry between the solar and male cult and the lunar or female cult, have provided inexhaustible sources of religious and literary lore. The legendary birth of Orpheus, adorned with his descent from Apollo, his flight from Thrace, initiation in the temple of Memphis, and return to his own country as a high adept of the most profound mysteries, constitute but the first part of his life. After his return to Greece, he reunited the cults of Dionysus and Zeus reformed that of Bacchus and instituted the mysteries. To him he was allotted the task of reducing the power of the Bacchantes, priestesses of Hecate, by a magic superior to theirs, and their vengeance, which caused his death, has been the theme of many a poet. One follows the evolution of Greece from Orpheus to Pythagoras, Socrates, and Plato, and one searches for the remnants of Egyptian esotericism in the utmost recesses of the Delphic temples and in the ceremonies of initiation to the Eleusinian mysteries. These having still been practiced until the Emperor Thaddeus the First, the Great, 379 to 395, prohibited them and ordered the destruction of the Eleusinian temple. Much material is available for their description. We are indebted to Bishop Lavington, an erudite member of the Anglican Church. We are indebted to Bishop Lavington, an erudite member of the Anglican Church, for a graphic description of the perversion to which they gave rise, but we preface this article with that author's apology to the reader, which, like the text of most of this chapter, we quote verbatim from the bishop's book, The Enthusiasm of Methodists and Papists Compared, Part 2. We wallow indeed in the mire by publishing these things, but lest anyone should fall into the mire of these heretics from mere ignorance, I purposely and knowingly defile my own mouth and the ears of the auditors, because it is beneficial. For it is much better to hear absurdity and filthiness in accusing others than to fall into them out of ignorance. Much better to be informed of the mirror than, for want of information, to fall into it. Bishop Lavington then proceeds with the explanation of the pagan mysteries, from which we quote. The gods and goddesses each had their special mysteries, even Kotato, the goddess of turpitude, and her rites and devotees. A high opinion of the mysteries was very far from being general, or received by the great good persons. Those great men, Agesilaus and Epaminondas, would not submit to the initiation. The Athenians, asking Diogenes to the initiation. My eyes, why are they doing that? The Athenians, this woman and her cadence is hard for me to get yet. I'm trying to figure out my cadence while I read this, so I'll skip and jump words, and when I catch it, which I try to, I will reread it, because I have to get the cadence right, or it's all fucking jarbled in my head. And if it's jarbled in my fucking head, God only knows what it's jarbling in yours. So I don't know. You're just gonna have to bear with me and learn and watch me learn on this. The Athenians asking Diogenes to the initiated because such had the sure. The Athenians asking Diogenes to be initiated because such had the precedency in a future state. He replied, ridiculous thing that Agesilaus and Epaminondas must roll in dirt, and every scoundrel initiated, such as Patasion the thief, be happy in the Elysian fields. Nor shall we entertain the better notion of the mysteries when we find so wise and good a man as Socrates refusing initiation. For which though perhaps he had stronger, he gives this reason. If the mysteries were bad, he should not be able to conceal the secret, but must discourage every one from initiation, and if good, humanity would oblige him to discover it for the public benefit. Whether the mysteries were good or bad, authors are pretty well agreed as the preparatory ceremonies and manners of initiation, whereby they were to represent and act over again the actions and passions of the deities, for whose honor the mysteries were instituted. The initiation might seem as venerable and solemn thing. The devotees were taught to qualify themselves by prayer to the demons, fastings, watchings, confession to the priest, and other lustrations. We read in Plutarch that fasting is to precede the mysteries of Ceres. Ceres is the word for church. Just came to mind. And that confession was required. Antilocetus being examined by the priest in order to his initiation, what grievous crimes he had committed, made answer, "If I have been guilty of any such crime, the gods know it already." Bow! The confession was a trick of the masters of the ceremonies to get the people under their girdle. Tertullian says, as to the superstition of the Eleusinian mysteries, what they conceal is the shame of them. Therefore they make the admission torturous. Take time in the initiation, set a seal on the tongue, and instruct the epote for 5 years to raise a high opinion of them by delay and expectation. But all the divinity in the sacred domes, the whole of what they aspire to, what sealeth the tongue is this. Simulacrum membrae virilis revelator. I don't even know what that means, but it has simulacrum in it, which is, in other words, the simulacrum. Before a cover of their sacrilege, they pretend these figures are only mystical representation of venerable nature. Now, that's awesome to me. The original reason of such figures being exposed to view and had in veneration in the mysteries we learn from others, Clemens Alexandrinus giveth a full account of this religion of the mysteries too prolix to be transcribed. Of their wicked institution, cruelty, stupidity, madness, making goddess of harlots, corrupting mankind, the mysteries of Ceres are nothing but representations of incestuous deities. Their ridiculous exclamations upon admission were, I have eat out of the timbrel, I have drank out of the symbol, I have carried the chest, I have crept into the secret chamber. In the chest, Padunum Bacchi inclusum erat, system et veterum nova religion colenda tradunt. It is a shame to mention the filthy circumstances in the story of Ceres. The pagan mysteries being of such an immoral nature and tendency, it might justly be thought strange were no notice taken of them in the Holy Scriptures, and therefore, though such an enquiry might carry us into too great a length, yet I shall not entirely pass it over. There can be then little doubt, but they are pointed out by St. Paul. It is a shame even to speak of those things that are done of them in secret. And where Christianity is termed the mystery of the godliness, it is set, I am persuaded, in opposition not only to the mystery of inequity that was to work in the Christian world, but likewise to the preceding mysteries among the Gentiles. Nor is it improbable that the apostle writeth in direct opposition to the appearances, pretenses, and impostures of those false divinities. Without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. In the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 23:17, not indeed in the Hebrew, but in the Septuagint, after the words, there shall be no whore, nor sodomites of the sons of Israel, we find added words of this import, there shall not be an initiator, nor an initiated of the sons or daughters of Israel. 'Tis possible this additional clause may have been inserted by 70 by way of interpretation of the preceding words. They knew the nature of the mysteries full well, and we are led to this meaning by the impurities forbidden, and by the prince of the dog in the next verse, the Egyptian god Anubis being usually figured with a dog's head. We may observe also that Philo the Jew, the sacrific, expressly ranketh the prohibition of the mysteries among the laws of Moses. The law, saith he, expressly excludeth the whole of the mysteries, their enchantments, and execrable scurrilities from the holy ordinances, not permitting those educated in her society to celebrate such heathen rites, nor depending on such mystical ceremonies to disregard the truth, and to follow the works of night and darkness, omitting what deserveth the light and the day. Let none, therefore, among the disciples of Moses either initiate or be initiated, it being equally wicked either to reach or to learn the mysteries. 'Tis generally the case with them that no good person is initiated, but thieves and pirates and mad gangs of abominable and immodest women, after partaking with their money to the initiating priests. Several of the fathers have taken notice of the same passage in the Septuagint and explained it in the same manner. For further proof of the turpitude in the mysteries of Isis and Osiris, and that it was so from the beginning, we need only consult Diodorus Siculus, Lib. 1. Isis, being overwhelmed with grief for the loss of her husband Osiris, took particular care in deifying him and consecrating his padenda, his dick, he didn't say that, I just threw that in there, which is ordered to be peculiarly honored and adored in the mysteries. And the same holy institution was observed with the same ceremonies when carried into Greece by Orpheus, where the common people, partly from ignorance and partly from love of the new god Phallus, were very fond of being initiated. Much more might be collected, even from initiated authors, however generally shy, concerning the infamous origin of the mysteries, which I pass over. The celebration of the Eleusinian mysteries commenced in Greece about 1400 years before Christ, but whenever or however they were brought into Greece and transferred to the honor of Ceres and Prospina, they were of the same nature and observed with equally chaste ceremonies with those of Isis. One contrivance for giving the initiated a sight of the divinities was by means of a looking-glass, wherein none could see their own faces, but had a clear view of the gods and goddesses. This we have from Pausanias, and Eusebius relates the same thing. So easily might weak people, and under the utmost astonishment, be deluded by figures behind a glass. Oh, it shut off. Well, it might have shut off on me, guys. I got to check something. I'm sorry. I heard a noise. That noise is important to look at. Huh? I think it's going. Cool. I'm sorry for that, Blake. That's like a real break. Must be fine. So easily might weak people, and under the utmost astonishment, be deluded by figures behind a glass in a proper habit and posture, and especially by living persons personating the deities in any manner they thought fit. As a proof of the indecencies, Sozomen writeth, we got fifths, that Theophilus, Bishop of Alexandria, are egregiously ridiculed and exposed to public view the shameful figures belonging to the mysteries, the phallus, etc., which he brought out of the pagan temple, for which the enraged heathens raised a tumult and massacred a great number of the Christians. Even the initiated Personians, notwithstanding his usual reservedness, sometimes blurts out a little too much and intimates something shameful, as frequent assignations. I think it's going into that now. The proneness of the religious females to venery, a mixture of the obscene and miraculous. The continuance of the Eleusinian festival for a week, on the third day whereof all males, even the dogs, are excluded. But the next day the men are admitted among them, when they pass the time in sporting and light discourse, the amours of Ceres of a very strange kind, with the secrecy enjoined, the obscenities in the mysteries of Cupid, and suitable hymns. Look up who Ceres was. She's interesting. A man initiated and under an oath of silence could not well have discovered more of the true nature of the mysteries and the reason why they ought not to be divulged. We are assured, too, that one day of the Eleusinian festival was set apart for the rites of Venus and Cupid, and another of those for Bacchus, both of which were confessedly beyond measure abominable. Nor will our opinion be more favorable when we remember what Athenaeus writes, Apelles, being extremely desirous of drawing a Venus from the famous Phaeron, could find no opportunity of seeing her naked, without going to the Eleusinian and Neptunian games, where she stripped herself in the sight of all men, and went into the sea to wash herself. Like a strip club. I apprehend, therefore, that no great stress is to be laid upon those initiated authors who have thought themselves obliged to say nothing but what was good of the mysteries, or have talked of the unity of the deity as the great secret of them, perhaps to avoid the shame of being thought dupes to a foolery, or inquisitive into something worse. On the same subject of Cavalier de Ramsay, reputed founder of Scottish rites, writes the following. This guy's probably important to the Scottish rite. About the 15th Olympiad, 600 years before the Christian era, the Greeks, having lost the traditional knowledge of the Orientals, began to lay aside the doctrine of the ancients and to reason about the divine nature from prejudices which their senses and imagination suggested. Anaximander lived at that time and was the first that set himself to destroy the belief of the supreme intelligence in order to account for everything from the action of blind matter, which by necessity assumes all sorts of forms. He was followed by Leucippus, Democritus, Epicurus, Strato, Lucretius, and all the school of the atomical philosophers. Pythagoras, Anaxagoras, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and all the great men of Greece opposed this impious doctrine and endeavored to prove the ancient theology of the Orientals. These philosophers of the superior genus observed in nature motion, thought, and design. And as the idea of matter includes none of these three properties, they inferred from thence that there was another substance different from matter. Greece being thus divided into two sects, they disputed for a long time without either party being convinced. At length, about 120th Olympiad, Pyrrho formed a third sect whose great principle was to doubt everything and determine nothing. All the atomists who had labored in vain to find out a demonstration of their false principles presently struck in with the Pyrrhonian sect. They ran wildly in the system of an universal doubt and carried it almost to such an excess or frenzy that they doubted of the clearest and most sensible truths. They maintained without an allegory that everything we see is only an illusion, and that the whole series of life is but a perpetual dream of which those of the night are only so many images. At last Zeno set up a fourth school about The 130th Olympiad, the philosopher endeavored to reconcile the disciples of Democritus with those of Plato by maintaining that the first principle was indeed an infinite wisdom, but his essence was only a pure ether or a subtle light, which diffused itself everywhere to give life, motion, and reason to all beings. In these last ages, the modern freethinkers have done nothing but revive the ancient errors. Giordano Bruno, Vanini, and Spinoza have vamped up the monstrous system of Anaximander, and the last of the three have endeavored to dazzle weak minds by dressing it up in geometrical forms. Some Spinozists, finding that they were every moment at a loss of evidence in the pretended demonstrations of their master, are fallen into senseless sort of skepticism called egoism, where everyone fancies himself to be the only being that exists. Mr. Hobbes and several other philosophers, without setting up for atheists, have ventured to maintain that thought and extension are properties of the same substance. Descartes, F. Malebranche, Leibniz, Dr. Bentley, Clark, and several philosophers of a genius equally mild and profound have endeavored to refute these errors and brought arguments to support the ancient theology. Besides the proof which are drawn from the effects, they have insisted on others drawn from the idea of the first cause. They shew plainly that the reasons of believing are infinitely stronger than any arguments there are for doubting. This is all that can be expected in metaphysical discussions. The history of former times is like that of our own human understanding, takes almost the same forms in different ages, and loses its way in the same labyrinths. Not bad. Chapter 9, The Druids. We heard in 1928 of a Druid celebration at Stonehenge. Shortly afterwards, we read of another, an initiation ceremony at Penzance, where 12 bards of Britain, including Sir Arthur Quiller Couch, the author, were initiated by the Archdruid of Wales into a sect revived after a lapse of 2,000 years. Some of us might prefer the lapse to have continued, and as the subject of the Druid mysteries is here relevant, we quote verbatim the chapter entitled The Druids, and from Mr. Charles William Heckthorne's interesting book, Secret Societies of All Ages and Countries. The secret doctrines of the Druids were much the same as those of the Gymnosophists and Brahmins of India, the Magi of Persia, the priests of India, and of all the other priests of antiquity. Like them, they had two sets of religious doctrines, exoteric and esoteric. Their rites were practiced in Britain and Gaul, though they were brought to a much greater perfection in the former country, where the Isle of Angeli was considered their chief seat. The word Druid is generally supposed to be derived from an oak, which tree was particularly sacred among them, though its etymology may also be found in the Gaelic word drua, a wise man or magician. The temples wherein the sacred fire was preserved were generally situate on eminences and in dense groves of oaks and assumed various forms. The datum or ark of the mysteries was called a cromlech and was used as the sacred pastos or place of regeneration. It consisted of 3 upright stones as supporters of a broad flat stone laid across them on the top so as to form a small cell. Kite Coty's house in Kent was such a pastos. Considerable space, however, was necessary for the machinery of initiation in its largest and most comprehensive scale. Therefore, the core city where the mysteries of Druidism were performed consisted of a range of buildings adjoining the temple and containing apartments of all sizes, cells, vaults, baths, and long and artfully contrived passages with all the apparatus of terror used on these occasions. Most frequently, these places were subterranean. The system of Druidism embraced every religious and philosophical pursuit then known in these islands. The rites bore an undoubted reference to astronomical facts. Their chief deities are reducible to two, a male and a female, the greater father and mother, Hu and Saradwin, distinguished by the same characteristics as belong to Osiris and Isis. Bacchus and Ceres, or any other supreme god and goddesses representing the two principles of all being. The grand periods of initiation were quarterly and determined by the course of the sun and his arrival at the equinoctial and solstitial points. But the time of the annual celebration was Maeve, when fires were kindled on all the cairns and cromlechs throughout the island, which burned all night to introduce the sports of May Day, not midday, whence all the national sports formerly or still practiced date their origin. May Day is an important one. Just something popped out. Of course it is. Everyone who pays attention knows May is an important day or month. May Day, all that shit. Pay attention. Round these fires, choral dances were performed in honor of the sun, who, at this season, was figuratively said to rise from his tomb. The festival was licentious and continued till the luminary had attained his meridian height, when priests and attendants retired to the woods where the most disgraceful orgies were perpetrated. But the solemn initiations were performed at midnight and contained 3 degrees, the first or lowest being the Ubates, the second, the bards, and the third, the druids. The candidate was first placed in the pastos bed, or coffin, where his symbolical death represented the death of Hu, or the sun, and his restoration in the 3rd degree symbolized by the resurrection of the sun. He had to undergo trials and tests of courage similar to those practiced in the mysteries of other countries, and which therefore need not be detailed here. The Druids taught the doctrines of one supreme being, a future state of rewards and punishments, the immortality of the soul, and the metempsychosis. Their doctrines were chiefly those of Pythagoras. Their authority in many cases exceeded that of the monarch. They were, of course, the sole interpreters of religion, and consequently superintended all sacrifices, for no private person was allowed to offer a sacrifice without their sanction. They possessed the power of excommunication, which was the most horrible punishment that could be inflicted next to that of death, and from the effects of which the highest magistrate was not exempt. The great council of the realm was not competent to declare war or conclude peace without their occurrence. They determined all disputes by a final and unalterable decision, and had the power of inflicting the punishment of death, and indeed their altars streamed with the blood of human victims, holocausts of men, women, and children enclosed in large towers of wicker work, where sometimes sacrificed as burnt offering to their superstitions, which were at the same time intended to enhance the consideration of the priests, who were an ambitious race delighting in blood. The Druids, it is said, preferred such as had been guilty of theft, robbery, or other crimes as most acceptable to their gods, but when there was a scarcity of criminals, they made no scruple to supply their place with innocent persons. These dreadful sacrifices were offered by the Druids for the public on the eve of a dangerous war, or in the time of any national calamity, and for their particular persons of high rank when they were afflicted with any dangerous disease. The priestesses, clothed in white and wearing a metal girdle, foretold the future from the observation of natural phenomena, but more especially from human sacrifices. For them was reserved the frightful task of putting to death the prisoners taken in war and individuals condemned by the Druids, and their sanctuaries were drawn from the manner in which the blood issued from the many wounded inflicted, and also from the smoking entrails. Many of these priestesses maintained a perpetual virginity. Others gave themselves upon the most luxurious excesses. As the Romans gained ground in these islands, the power of the Druids gradually declined, and they were finally assailed by Suetonius Paulinus, governor of Britain under Nero, AD 61. In their stronghold, the Isle of Angelaise, and entirely defeated the conqueror, consuming many of them in the fires which they had kindled for burning the Roman prisoners they had expected to make. A very just retaliation upon these sanguinary priests. But though their dominion was thus destroyed, many of their religious practices continued much longer. And so late in the 11th century, in the reign of Canute, it was necessary to forbid the people to worship the sun, moon, fires, etc. Certainly, many of the practices of the Druids are still adhered to in Freemasonry, and some writers on this order endeavor to show that it was established soon after the Edict of Canute, and that as thereby the Druidical worship was prohibited in toto, the strongest oaths were required to bind the initiated to secrecy. There is no mystery as to the existence in Berlin of the Druidonian today. It is a branch of Freemasonry, and its sovereign Grand Master, until late, was Dr. Huby Schlinden. That's it. Chapter 10. Christianity. To define Christianity, one could hardly do better than use the words of Frederick W. Farrar, Canon of Westminster and chaplain to Queen Victoria, who in 1874 wrote A Life of Christ. In his preface are the following lines. Right. We study the sacred books of all the great religions of the world. We see the effect exercised by those religions on the mind of their votaries, and in spite of all the truths which even the worst of them enshrined, we watch the failure of them all to produce the inestimable blessings which we have ourselves enjoyed from infancy, which we treasure as dearly as our life, and which we regard as solely due to the spread and establishment of the Christian faith. We read the systems and treatises of ancient philosophy, and in spite of all the great and notable elements in which they abound, we see their total incapacity to console or support or deliver or regenerate the world. Then we see the light of Christianity dawning like a tender spring day amid the universal and intolerable darkness. From the first, the new religion allies itself with the world's utter feeblenesses, and those feeblenesses it shares, yet without wealth, without learning, without genius, without arms, without anything to dazzle and attract the religion of outcasts and exiles, of fugitives and prisoners, numbering among its earliest converts not many wise, not many noble, not many mighty, but such as the Galor of Philippi and the runaway slave of Colossae, with no blessing apparently upon it, save such as cometh from above, with no light whatever about it, save the light that comes from heaven. It puts to flight kings and their armies. It breathes a new life, a new hope, a new and unknown holiness into a guilty and decrepit world. This we see, and we see the work grow and increase and become more and more irresistible, and spread with the gentleness of a sea that caresses the shore it covers. Words fail when attempting to speak of Jesus Christ, the founder of Christianity. His birth, life, and death are known to all. His teaching was public and accessible to the humblest. Long years of learning awful initiation ceremonies striking terror in the adept's soul were not required from the followers of Christ, himself the bearer of that light which he taught was not to be found in man's earthly nature, but was to be sought from without. He invoked God with humble prayer and faith and performed all miracles. Therein is Christ's teaching diametrically opposed to that of the high adepts whose secret doctrine was that man had divinity in himself and could bring it out by exercise of will, by concentration of thought and scientific psychic development. Fear, the predominant feature attendant upon the gaining of knowledge in all other religious systems, was foreign to the adherents of Christ, who were repeatedly told, "Fear not, be not afraid." No bonds, no fetters were imposed by him in the shape of ritualism. Love of God and love of neighbor were the only precepts. Faith and charity, the only means through which the divine spirit gave man transcendental power over moral evil and physical ills. No purer and simpler doctrine, no greater knowledge of the communion possible between God and man had ever been given. Yet within a very short time after the death of Christ, Christian ritualism began to appear. A theological system of dogmas and beliefs was devised, modes of worship elaborated, and a hierarchy arose with all its attendant evils. However, the Christian faith, under the lash of persecution, had shown the world the power of faith and charity, and against this power the forces of evil have ever been unfurled. Blow after blow was dealt to the rising church. Both its beliefs and practices were attacked by those who professed other views and worshipped other gods, and who designed all schemes to subvert and pervert Christianity. Henceforth, as it has ever been with all religions, the history of Christianity and of Gnosticism will develop side by side, the perversion and destruction of the former being the aims of the latter. The tree of Christianity gave forth three main branches: the Catholicism of Rome, Greek Catholicism, and in the 16th century, Lutheranism. The two former bodies remained homogeneous, but Lutheranism gave birth to innumerable sects, all dissenting from the parent branch. Interesting. Cool. What is this? It's chapter 11, Manichaeism. Manichaeism is the religion of the followers of Manes, a slave who was sold to a widow who freed and adopted him, thus making him the son of the widow, a name which after him passed to all his followers and is still used in Masonic lodges. Of Manichaeism, C.W. Oliver, considered an authority on all Masonic matters, writes, Manichaeism was one of the most important attempts to be found a universal religion and to reconcile the Christian, Buddhist, and Mazdian with the Greek philosophy. It presented the same syncretic ideas found later among Muslim Druze and among Sikhs. It failed in the first place because Islam presented a much simpler system in the East, and because in the West Christianity was already developing in the time of Manes, a religion which aimed to reconciling the paganism of Italy and Gaul with the ethics of Christ, this presenting a simpler and more familiar faith. But the one achievement of Manes was the creation of the devil, which led to the afterwards unremovable taint throughout religions. Manes was a notable philosopher and religious teacher born about the year AD 216. And he was crucified and flayed alive by the Persian Magi under Brahman I in the year AD 277. His Persian name was Sharak, rendered Cubricus in Latin. He was the slave of the wife of a certain Terbinith, who was a disciple of Sithanaeus, of the race of the Saracens. Oliver tells us further that his Acta Archdei became the Mancinian Bible with sundry added epistles. He taught the Mazdian dualism of the powers of light and darkness as representing good and evil beings, and the ascension which aimed at the control of all passions. Mainz repudiated Judaism and, like the Gnostics, regarded Jehovah as an evil god. The Manichaeans were more hated and feared by Catholic Christians than any other sect. They were still in existence in spite of constant persecution as late as our 10th century, and their influence was left from China to Spain and Gaul. It still lingers in Asia, and among the Christians of St. Thomas in Madras it survived till the 15th century. St. Augustine had listened for 9 years to Mainz, but the Roman Empire felt the force of this system chiefly in AD 280. The Romans knew it themselves in AD 330, and Faustus became its missionary among them. Many clung to Mancinianism till AD 440, when Leo the Great found that he must stamp it out if the Roman creed was not to be extinguished. It was the basis of the Paulinian heresy and of that of the Albigenses in the south of France, which was only quenched by blood in the 13th century. The doctrine of Mainz can be summed up as follows. He believed in two gods, or more exactly, principles, the principle of good and that of evil. Before the creation of the world, the people of darkness revolted against the God, and God, incapable of withstanding the attack, gave to them a portion of his essence. The people of darkness, having within them the principle of evil by their very nature and the principle of good which they had just acquired, were able to constitute the world, where both these principles constitute the world, where both these principles are combined, but where the principle of evil predominates as the natural characteristic of its originators. Man is a mixture of two natures, the spiritual being, the work of God, the body, and especially sex, the work of the devil. Summoners, another authority, further explains that it must be clearly borne in mind that these heretical bodies with their endless ramifications were not merely exponents of erroneous religious and intellectual beliefs by which they morally corrupted all who came under their influence, but they were the avowed enemies of law and order, red-hot anarchists who would stop at nothing to gain their ends. Terrorism and secret murder were their most frequent weapons. The Manichaean system was in truth a simultaneous attack upon the church and the state, a desperate but well-planned organization to destroy the whole fabric of society, to reduce civilization to chaos. Manichaeism possessed its dogmas, liturgies, devotees, and churches. But again, to quote Oliver, first and foremost amongst the manifestations of what had become devil worship, we find the Black Mass or devil masses of the Middle Ages, from which the ceremonial and ritual of black magic are derived. The principle which forms the very essence of the devil, the idea of opposition, also underlies the whole ceremonial and ritual of black magic and black masses. Such ideas as repeating prayers backwards, reversing the cross, consecrating obscene or filthy objects are typical of this sense of opposition or desecration, which is also a recognized form of mental disease. The key word to the whole of the practices of black magic is desecration. Yet another authority not to be overlooked, namely Abel Barul, author of Memoirs pour servir à la histoire du Jacobinisme, shows the remarkable analogy between the dogmas and rituals of Freemasonry, Templarism, and those of Manichaeism. Grades concur in number and signs are identical. The mourning for Jacques Molay is a ceremony analogous to that practiced by the Manichaeans in remembrance of Manes and known as Bema. The term Makbamet Bannock, still used in the Masonic lodges, was the reminder of the execution of Manes, which all Manichean adepts sought to avenge. The practice of so-called fraternity or brotherhood was in Manichaeism extended only to adepts of the sect, just as it is similarly practiced by Freemasons towards one another. The question which naturally comes up to one's mind when one follows closely the links of the Manichaean chain is this: is not Freemasonry, such as we see it today, the full development of the idea of Gubericus of Manes the slave, the apotheosis of Manichaeism as achieved by Albert Pike, sovereign pontiff of universal Freemasonry? Crazy. All three of these, man. These books, they're all just kind of like falling together. No rhyme or reason, but it's pretty incredible. Chapter 12, Witchcraft. Margaret Alice Murray, writing in The Witch Cult in Western Europe, establishes both the phallic and religious character of the craft in her remarkable book, from which we extract part of the following valuable information. The deity worshipped by the witches was in some cases Lucifer as the good god in the opposition of Adonai, the Christian god, in his character of the benefactor of humanity, and in other instances Satan, the same spirit as the principle of evil. This is evident from the various references to their deity adduced in the trials of persons accused of this heresy. In both cases, however, the devotees, whether of Lucifer or Satan, were obliged formally to renounce Christ, the Holy Ghost, and the Christian God before embracing the devil faith, which was the logical outgrowth of the Mazdian Manichaean dualist doctrine of the double divinity. The god of the witches seemed to have been generally represented either as the double-faced god Janus or the goat-headed Baphomet, the latter variously modified but usually bearing between the horns on its head the phallic emblem of the lighted candle. Esoterically, this candle symbolized the sex force or kundalini risen to the pineal gland. Cotton Mather stated that the witches form themselves after the manner of congregational churches. Wait a second. Cotton Mather stated that the witches form themselves after the manner of congregational churches, and M.A. Murray gives the following description of their leader. The chief or supreme head of each district was known to the orders of the devil. Below him in each district, one or more officers, according to the size of the district, were appointed by the chief. The officers might be either men or women. Their duties were to arrange for meetings, to send out notices, to keep the record of work done, to transact the businesses of the community, and to present new members. Evidently, these persons also noted any likely convert and either themselves entered into negotiations or reported to the chief, who then took action as opportunity served. At the Isbats, the officer appears to have taken command in the absence of the Grand Master. At the Sabbaths, the officers were merely heads of their own covens and were known as devils or spirits, though recognized as greatly inferior to the chief. The principal officer acted as clerk at the Sabbath and entered the witches' report in the book. If he were a priest or ordained minister, he often performed part of the religious service. But the devil himself always celebrated the Mass or sacrament. From Le Monde in La Tradition, published 1892, we learn that the garter is the distinctive mark of the witch leader. For a woman shared this honor with the Grand Master as the Grand Mistress, and in some cases occupied the office of deacon. Animal masks seem to have been a popular form of disguise adopted by the witches and wizards attending meetings, and this custom is probably responsible for many of the stories of witch lycanthropy. Reminds me of all those presidents and stuff that go around and, blow each other and go to dances. Among other obscene and phallic witch rites was the Black Mass, celebrated by a renegade priest upon the naked body of an adept for whose benefit it was performed. It symbolized the perversion of all the rites of the Catholic Church: black candles instead of white, inverted crosses, chalices containing the blood of newborn infants sacrificed for ritual purposes, urine for holy water. All these were part of the paraphernalia needed, according to the historians, to propitiate the Prince of Darkness and his retinue of minor devils. Besides evocations, casting of spells, and sex orgies, devil worship entailed such inanities as desecration of the host stolen from Catholic churches and the kissing of the Grand Master Devil on the tail or membrum virile. Only hosts consecrated in Roman Catholic churches could serve for Black Mass purposes, as it was essential. Well, that's great. In order to achieve desecration, that the miracle and transubstantiation should have taken place. The host had actually to be not merely to represent the body and blood of Christ. As regards the Black Mass, M. Emmanuel Calet makes the following astute observation in La Prohibition de l'Occult, page 113. One may wonder if it was not in order to canonize such an overflow of sacrilege that the Church in the Middle Ages tolerated the Feast of Fools, at last vestige of the Saturnalia of ancient Greece. Before the altar, upon the communion table, writes C. Leonard, were spread pell-mell grilled hogs, puddings, sausages, playing cards, and dice. For perfumes, old shoe leather burned in the incense burners. Even the text of the divine service becomes the butt of the intermingled parody, a confused jumble of jests and nonsense, of grotesque alleluias and Latin buffooneries, an indescribable chivalry of catcalls, cries, and whistles, etc. A few days afterwards, the church, purged of all these impurities, washed and cleansed, resumed its usual appearance. God again became master of his altar. The flood of human folly had passed. In 1484, Pope Innocent the Eighth issued a bull against the craft, couched in the following terms: "It has come to our ears that numbers of both sexes do not avoid to have intercourse with demons, incubi, and succubi, and that by their sorceries and by their incantations, charms, and conjurations, they suffocate, extinguish, and cause to perish the births of women, the increase of animals, the corn of the ground, the grapes of the vineyard, and the fruit of the trees, as well as men, women, flocks, herds, and other various kinds of animals, vines and apple trees, grass, corn, and other fruits of the earth, making and procuring that men and women, flocks, and herds, and other animals shall suffer and be tormented both from within and without, so that men beget not, nor women conceive, and they impede the conjugal action of men and women." Eliphas Levi, in Histoire de la Magie, page 116, gives the following explanation of the supposed origin of elementals known by spiritualists as dwellers on the threshold. He states that, according to the best authorities, these spirits, larvae, possess the eternal body formed of the vapor of blood. That is why they seek blood and why they were supposed formerly to feed on the smoke of sacrifices. They are the incubi and succubi, the monstrous children of impure dreams. When sufficiently condensed to be visible, they are only a vapor colored by the reflection of a picture, and, having no independent life, they imitate the life of him who evokes them as the shadow does the body. They generally manifest around the persons of idiots and being devoid of morality, whose isolation has led them to develop irregular habits. Owing to the feeble cohesion of these parts of their fantastic bodies, they fear the open air, fire, and above all the point of swords, and as they live only by the life of those who have created or evoked them, they became a vaporous appendices of the real body of their parents. So it can happen that an injury inflicted on them might actually react upon the parent body as the unborn child is really wounded or disfigured by an impression made upon its mother. These elementals draw the vital heat from persons in good health and quickly exhaust those who are weak. They are the source of the stories of vampires, stories only too true and periodically recurrent, as everyone knows. That is why one feels a chill of the atmosphere when approaching mediums who are persons obsessed by these spirits that never manifest in the presence of anyone able to unveil the mystery of their monstrous birth. They are children of an exalted imagination or unbalanced mentality. In politics throughout the ages, witchcraft and practice by subversive sects has played a prominent part. Illustrations of this are to be found in the case of the North Berwick witches who were tried for treason in 1592 when their devil or Grand Master, Francis Stuart, Earl of Bothwell, attempted to supplant James VI as King of Scotland. The Black Masses held by the infamous Abe Guberg for Madame de Montespan, with the object of regaining for her the favor of Louis XIV, are famous in history. Elvis Levi, the great initiate, has thus defined the aims of magic and witchcraft: to deceive the peoples for the purpose of exploiting them, to enslave them and delay their progress, to prevent it even if possible. Such is the crime of black magic. I just keep seeing that picture of Obama with that fucking head thing. You know, in that one picture. You ever seen that? I've seen that. Just reminds me of it. I don't know why. Proof of the foregoing devil worship and contact with spirits or devils is found in history even as late as 1819, when we read that the devil met Margaret Nin Gilbert, etc., studying the history of the Mopses in 1761. We find its grand masters, grand mistresses, and deacons adorned with the distinctive garter of the witch, performing the ceremonial of kissing the devil's tail as part of the ritual of the 18th century Masonry. The coven of the Middle Ages is the Masonic lodge of today, but the craft remains the craft. Now I have to... All right. Recording. Chapter 13. Gnostics. The heretics. Gnosticism, like the ancient mysteries, was founded on spiritism. Their mediums giving instructions purporting to come from the gods or spirits. In the Christian era, one of the earliest prominent Gnostics was Simon Magus, a Jew and an adept of the sect of Docethians. His article is composed of certain passages transcribed verbatim from the Moravians, compared and detected by Lavington. Among the successive disciples of Simon Magus were Basilides, Valentinius, Carpocrates, Marcus, Marcion, Sardo, Epiphanes, Montanus, etc. And according to the Bishop Lavington, these were heretics, and that they were heretics of the worst kind that ever defiled and disgraced the Christian name is allowed by all denominations of Christians. Some of these lived in the 1st century and even in the apostles' days, but the 2nd century was most fruitful in the production of this generation of vipers, and we must receive our knowledge of their abominable tenets from the early ecclesiastical writers, such as Irenaeus, Epiphanius, Theodoret, and many others. The spirit among these heretics went by different names: Ogdoas, Sophia, Terra, Jerusalem, and Lord in the masculine gender. It is particularly called both Prunicus and Prunitia. Mother Prunitia, the bold, and Mother Achamoth, The mother is a woman from a woman. Sometimes their celestial beings are neither male nor female, sometimes interchangeably either male or female. Such was the excellency of their knowledge and illumination, who arrogantly styled themselves Gnostics, that they are superior to Peter or Paul or many of Christ's other disciples. They only have drunk up the supreme knowledge, are above principalities and powers, secure of salvation, and for that very reason are free to debauch women or indulge all manner of licentiousness. This knowledge is of itself perfect redemption and sufficient. Simon Magus, who taught that his harlot Helena was the Holy Ghost, instituted certain foul and infamous mysteries inexpressibly filthy, and had assemblies equally filthy to celebrate them, these being the mysteries of life and of the most perfect knowledge. Their Carpocratians practiced all manner of philtries and enchantments, in order, as they speak, to have full power in all things, and do whatever they please. Hence they spend their time in luxury and pleasure and bodily enjoyments, nor ever come among us unless it be to ensnare unstable souls and entice them into their impious doctrine. For this end they taught incontinence to be obligatory as a law, and not only lawful, but necessary to salvation, not only compatible with the Savior's religion, but an essential part of it. And those were the best men, who, in the common opinion, were the most vicious. The Carpocratians grew to the degree of madness that, being unable to conceal their debaucheries, they made incontinence to be the law. Perdiccas added this to the tenets of Carpocratius. See, if it's Socrates, then this has to be Carpocrates. Can't say it. That fornication ought to be open to the public and the use of women common. For which reason, in their feasts, the candles were extinguished, each lay with the women, a chance appointed, and they called this lasciviousness a mystical initiation of mystical communion. Clemens Alex gives a long passage from the writings of Epiphanes, contending for a community of women, as being the law of heaven, and that men and women ought no more be confined to their armors than other animals. For, says Epiphanes, he hath implanted a strong and vehement desire in man of propagating his species, which neither law, nor custom, nor anything else can abolish. For JT is the decree of God. It is the decree of God. That is a typo. The Ophites, or Kenites, say that Cain was the progeny of a higher principality than Abel, and they confess that Esau, Korah, and the Sodomites, and all such were their relations. The Vulgo was the creator of the universe, and that none could be saved unless he passed through all. So also Carpocrates taught most of the Gnostics with wonderful artifice of improbity, taught, this one's a tough one. It's hard to, just give me a second, if anyone's even listening. Go through two different distinct things, and now I've got to jump into this one. Went through one book, now this book, now I got to get into this book. It's good practice. Where was I? Okay, let's just start this. The Ophites, or Kenites, say that Cain was the progeny of a higher principality than Abel, and they confess that Esau, Korah, and the Sodomites, and all such were their relations, that Vulva was the creator of the universe, and that none could be saved unless he passed through all. So also Carpocrates taught most of the Gnostics with wonderful artifice of improbity, taught what is not fit to be named in the promiscuous use of women, and to roll in all manner of filthy communication. The banquet being over, says the man to the woman, arise and shew thy love to a brother. So they proceed to copulation. Some of them, by a most horrible abuse of Scripture, apply the words, give to every one that asketh thee, towards enticing the woman. Take hold, says Isidorus, of some robust woman, that you be not plucked away from grace. And when you have spent your seminal fire, you may spray. You may pray with a good conscience. Sorry. Both Epiphanes and Irenaeus before him say of the founder of the Nicolaitans, being ashamed of his own remissness, he audaciously pronounced that no one who was not lascivious every day could be partaker of eternal life. Therefore, those Gnostics, after a debauchery, were used to boast of their happiness as having done a meritorious thing, and when they had their will on a complying female, they told her she was now a pure virgin, though she was daily corrupted, and for many years together. This may be a proper place to introduce the confession of Epiphanius, who in his youth had fallen into the Gnostic heresy, whence he received what he writes concerning them from the professed teachers' own mouths, when their women, one in particular, used all their arts to debauch him, but they, help of the divine grace, he overcame their temptations. I was then, says he, reproached by those pestilent women who thus scoffingly talked with each other. We would have saved this youth, but not being able, we have suffered him to perish in the hands of the principalities. For the most beautiful among them makes herself the bait, and those whom she enticeth, she is said not to destroy, but to deliver. Whence the handsomest are used to upbraid those who are less so. I am an elect vessel, able to save those whom I attempt, which you have not power to do. The most beautiful of them were employed to seduce me, but God delivered me from their wickedness, so that, after reading their books, I escaped from among them and discovered the several names of them to the bishops of those parts. And near 80 of them were sent into banishment. The Valentinian, says Irenaeus, being the love with certain women, would, without a blush, seduce them from their husbands, to make them their own wives. Others of them, seemingly modest at first, pretended to live with them as sisters, and in process of time were discovered, sister being found pregnant by brother. And to aggravate their wickedness, they esteemed copulation as a most sacred mystery, known only to themselves, and which the profane were not allowed to put in practice. What was abominable in others being highly meritorious in themselves. For, saith Irenaeus again, they have this grace descending to them from the unspeakable and unnameable copulation above, for which reason they ought always to be meditating on the mystery of copulation, and thus they persuade silly people, addressing them in discourse. Whoever is in the world and of the world, and mingleth with a woman, is not of the truth, nor shall pass into the truth, because he mingleth in concupisciousness. Therefore, continence, they say, is necessary to us natural men, but they by no means to themselves, who are spiritual and perfect, among whom the seed, small from above, is perfected here. Compare Tertullian, page 261. To quote Clemens Alexandrinus, I will bring in to open light your most secret mysteries, not ashamed to speak what you are not ashamed to worship, i.e. the secrets of both sexes, for I may well call them atheists who imprudently worship those parts which modestly forebodes to mention. Chapter 14. Lamaism. Lamaism was founded about 407 AD by a bodhisattva called, it is said, Chomshim. In Chinese, Boyanchi Yin. The voice reflects the world. On the mountain Bathala, around which was built the sacred city of Lhasa. Lamaism is not only a religion, it is a theistic government. In 1206, when Tibet was conquered by Genghis Khan, Mongol, Buddhism became the established religion, but in 1368, when Tibet fell from the hands of the Mongols into those of the Chinese, Lamaism, losing its temporal power, became merely a religion, its spiritual power remaining, however, the same, and the religion of more than 250 million men. The Lamas are priests of Buddha among the Mongols and Tibetans, but Lamaism is not Orthodox Buddhism. Gautama Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, laid down the following laws governing the attainment of nirvana, state of not being. Their enumeration will serve to show how Buddhism and Lamaism differ. According to that great teacher, the 10 obstacles which prevent people from attaining the supreme liberation are: 1. The belief in the ego. 2. Doubt. 3. Belief in the efficacy of rites and ceremonies. The efficacy? I can't say that word. The belief of rites and ceremonies. 4. Sensual desires. 5. Anger. 6. The wish to live in a world less coarse than our own. 7. The wish to live in a more subtle world than our own. 8. Pride. 9. Agitation. 10. Ignorance. The few quotations given hereafter from the very remarkable books of Madame Alexandria David Neal can only serve to show students of these subjects the great value of the books themselves. Quoting the Bhagavad Gita, she writes, Orthodox Buddhism denied the existence of a permanent soul which transmigrated, and considered this theory as the most pernicious of errors, but the great majority of Buddhists have fallen back into this old belief of the Hindus concerning the jiva, self, which periodically changes its old body for a new one, as we cast off old clothes for new. The Tibetan clergy comprises a theocratic aristocracy, the members of which are called lamas, tolkos. According to popular belief, a tolko is either the reincarnation of a saint or dead sage, or else the incarnation of a superhuman being, a god or a demon. In answer to the question she put to the Dalai Lama on the definition of the word tolku, Madame David Neal quotes him as saying, Abhavavista is the base from which can spring numberless magical forms. The force he engenders by a perfect concentration of thought enables him simultaneously to show a phantom similar to himself in thousands and thousands of worlds. He is not only able to create human forms, but every other kind as well, even to inanimate objects such as a house, enclosures, forests, roads, bridges, etc., etc. And he can produce atmospheric phenomena as well as the elixir of immortality which quenches all thirst. This expression, he explained, was to be taken both in the literal and symbolic sense. In fact, concluded the Dalai Lama, his power to create magic forms is limitless. The Kandhomas are reincarnated women, fairies, and may either be married or in holy orders. The usual method employed for locating the new body appropriated by an old soul is the following. A child answering to the prescribed conditions is discovered by a Lama diviner is consulted. Should he pronounce in favor of the candidate, the following form of trial takes place. Some personal belongings of the deceased lama are mixed with other similar ones, and the child must point out the first, thus proving that he recognizes the things that were his in his former existence. The system assumed its present form towards the year 1650 when the fifth Grand Lama, Lopao Zhang, So, having become sovereign of Tibet, but wishing to acquire a higher dignity, proclaimed himself the reincarnation avatar of Chen Rizig, a dignitary of the Mahayanist pantheon. Simultaneously, he established his master as Grand Lama of the monastery of Traklahumpo, proclaiming him the reincarnation of Apamed, a mystic Buddha of whom Chen Rizig was the spiritual son. Hold on. Okay. The example thus given by the Lama King stimulated the creation of tulkos. Soon, all monasteries made a point of having at their head the incarnation of some celebrated personage. Thus, the Dalai Lama, the political head of Tibet today, is said still to be a reincarnation of Chen Rizig, and the present Traki Lama, one of Upamad. The palace of the Dalai Lamas is a monastery of Galden, situated some 20 meters from Lhasa. It was founded by Tsongkhapa in the 15th century. Tsongkhapa, the reformer, forbade marriage and use of fermented beverages to the clergy. His followers called Golokobus, are known as the Yellow Sect, and their favorite god is Jid, the Destroyer, the Terrible. Another version of the Hindu god Shiva. Okay, so it's Jigshajid. The Red Sect, the Sakyapas, those distinguished by their red hats, are their religious opponents. As regards to the Tibetan gods and the ritual pertaining to the worship of Madame David Neal, As regards the Tibetan gods and their as regarding the Tibetan gods and the ritual pertaining to their worship, Madame David Neal gives us the following most illuminating description. That sounds better to me. To the respiratory exercises repeated several times a day, the recluse often joins meditation contemplation assisted by kilkors. A kilkor, or magic circle, is a kind of diagram drawn on paper or stuff engraved on metal, stone, or wood. Deities or lamas are generally represented on them by little pyramids of paste called torma. Kilkors are also designed with colored powder on boards or on the floor. But only such persons as have received a special initiation may compose or draw them. Each kelahor, moreover, requires a particular initiation, and that erected by a non-initiate would remain a dead thing impossible to animate and powerless. An advanced student wishing to evoke a bodhisattva or deity seeks to animate the kilkor, which hitherto only served as a focus for concentration. The Hindus endow magical diagrams as well as the statues of deities with life before worshipping them. The object of this rite, called the prana pratishtha, is to convey to the inanimate object by means of psychic currents the energy of the worshipper. The life thus infused into the latter is kept up by the daily cult, which is rendered it, for it lives on the concentration of thought which has given it birth. Should it suddenly be deprived of this subtle food, the living soul within it will perish and die of inanition, the object reverting to its former condition of inert matter. The Tibetan mystics animate their Kilkor by a similar method, but they do not aim at making it an object of worship, and the material representation of the Kilkor is abolished when, after a certain amount of practice, it becomes purely a mental image. A tradition of the Kaidupas relates that the founder of their sect, Marpa, was blamed by his master guru, Narota, for having paid homage first to the Kilkor. "It is I who constructed the Kilkor," declared Narota. "Its life and energy were infused in it by me. Without me, those figures would be the only inert objects. The gods that inhabit it are born of my spirit. Therefore, it is to me that homage is primarily due." According to the Tibetan occultists, these beings, the gods, have acquired a kind of real existence due to the innumerable thoughts which have been concentrated on them. According to the Tibetans, during the celebration of a rite, the thoughts of the officiating evoker concentrated on his deities who exist already cause these to become more powerful and more real for him. By identifying himself with them, the evocator establishes contact with an accumulation of energy infinitely greater than that which he alone might generate. Thus, we must conclude that the gods of Eastern magic correspond to what our Occidental scientists call thought forms, that these thought forms can be projected and reabsorbed into the person of their creator is a theory with which all students of Spiritism and psychic science are familiar, but that they can detach from their makers and lead separate existences, empowered for good or evil by the collective thought force of their worshippers, is an idea with which the Western world is still unfamiliar. Gods, demons, the whole universe is a mirage, a fantasy of the brain issuing through forum and resolvent thereto. Thus, the aim of the teaching is to bring the student to understand that the world and all its phenomena are but phantasms born of our own imagination. This, in short, is the fundamental teaching of the mystics of Tibet. Among the various tricks taught to initiates and described by Madame David Neal in her books are yoga breathing exercises, pages 119, in Initiations and Lamechtes, levitation, 209, in Parmi les mystiques et les magiciens du Thibet, Wangrom, fast walking, 211, Tomu, self-heating, 219, telepathy, 231. Okay. Buddha, who, after a thorough investigation of them, rejected the physical practice of the Brahmins, pays little heed to the breathing exercises of yoga. In his spiritual teaching, Madame David Neal tells the following anecdote of the antecedent of the great master. One day, Buddha, traveling with one of his disciples, met an emaciated yogi along in a hut in the middle of the forest. The master stopped, inquiring how long the ascetic had lived in that place, practicing such austerities. 25 years, answered the yogi. And what results have you obtained after such dire efforts? Queried the Buddha further. I am able to cross a river walking on the water, proudly declared the anchorite. Ah, one, my poor friend, answered the sage sympathetically. Have you really wasted so much time for that, when for a pittance you can get taken across it on the ferry? Okay. That's real funny, Buddha. On page 157 of her remarkable book, Initiations, Lamechtes, Madame David Neal explains further. Oh, my God. The existence of another school of curious rites, presumably a development of degenerate Hindu Tantric Buddhism, to the practice of which may be ascribed much that seems objectionable in the Oriental occultism, which has filtered through to the Western world. There, we are told that a certain class of Tibetan occultists teach a method of semi-physical, semi-psychic stimulation, which consists in such singular practices as that of causing the seminal flow ejected in the course of sexual union to be reabsorbed, etc., etc. Tibet is indeed the land of demons, where official lamanism competes with unofficial sorcery and magic. White and black still remains the law of the land. Ready? Good. Chapter 15. The Yazidis. That's Yezidees. Devil worshippers. The sect of the Yazidis was founded by Sheikh Adi in the 5th century. Mr. W.B.C. Brooks' observations of the Yazidis is recorded in his book, Adventures in Arabia, form a basis for the study of the beliefs of this sect. According to his informant, the Yazidi faith is briefly this. God created 7 spirits, as a man lighteth one lamp after another, and the first of these spirits was Satan, whom God made supreme ruler of the earth for a period of 10,000 years. And because Satan was supreme master of the earth, those who dwelt on it could prosper only by doing him homage and worshiping him. Since the true name was forbidden, Muhammad Hamadi told me, they referred to Shaitan as Melek Taus, angel peacock, and worshipped him in the form of a brass bird. While the name of Shaitan was forbidden, he said, so much so that if a Yazidi hears it spoken, their law commands him either to kill the man who uttered it or kill himself. Yet we could talk as freely with them about Melek Taus as we could to a Christian about Jesus. A priest of the cult also volunteered the following information to Mr. Seabrook on the Yazidi divinity. Our difference from all other religions is this, that we know God is so far away that we can have no contact with him, and he, on his part, has no knowledge or interest of any sort concerning human affairs. It is useless to pray to him or worship him. He cares nothing about us. He has given the entire control of this world He has given the entire control of this world for 10,000 years to the bright spirit Melek Taus, and him, therefore, we worship. Muslims and Christians are wrongfully taught that he whom we call Melek Taus is the spirit of evil. We know that this is not true. He is the spirit of power and the ruler of this world. At the end of 10,000 years of his reign, of which we are now in the 3,000, he will re-enter paradise as the chief of the 7 bright spirits, and all his true worshippers will enter paradise with him. The grand priest of the order, the Mer, receives 1/7 part of the harvest of the land. He is the arbiter of all religious matters, and under him rank 7 ecclesiastical orders. The doctrine of the Yazidis is contained in 3 sacred books, the Black Book, the Revelation, and the Contract with the Devil. But a knowledge of reading and writing is restricted to the priests of the first order and is classified by the sect as a serious sin. All right. Chapter 16, Orthodox Islam. Okay. The Arabian Peninsula was the home of nomads and mountaineers when, in the 7th century, Muhammad arose as a self-styled prophet and the creator of Islamism. The doctrine of Islam has 3 dogmas. 1. Monotheism. 2. Belief in the prophet, namely Muhammad. 3. The law of retribution. The sacred book of Islamism, the Quran, was devoid of mystic teaching. The 5th, for every believer, is the code of morals and obligations such as fast, prayer, pilgrimage to Mecca, etc. Mysticism was interjected into Islam by Sufism. Muhammad aimed at the establishment of a religion which he declared was revealed to him during periods of trance which he frequently underwent. He was determined to impose this religion on all the Arabs, and through much bloodshed, he succeeded in stamping out the Qurayshites from whom he took Mecca. The death of Muhammad was the signal for disruption among his followers and innumerable division, both political and religious. From the history of the Arabs during their periods of conquest, which began immediately after the death of Muhammad during the Caliphate of Omar, 634 to 644. All right. Like chapter 17. Unorthodox Islam, the Ishmaelites, the Lodge of Cairo. Manichaeism was not the only secret association that sprang from the initiations of the Magi. In the 7th century of our era, we meet with similar societies possessing an influence not limited to the regions in which they arose. Variations of one single thought which aimed at combining the venerable doctrines of Zoroaster with Christian belief. Of these societies or sects, the following may be mentioned: the followers of Cheomers, the worshippers of Servan, certain Zoroastrians, so-called dualists, Gnostics, and lastly the followers of Mastic, the most formidable and disastrous of all, preaching universal equality and liberty, the irresponsibility of man, and the community of property and women. The Arabs, having rendered themselves masters of Persia in the 7th century, the sects of that country set to work to spread their tenets among Islam in order to undermine it. This is corroborated by Heckthorn, who writes, "The Persian sects examined the Quran, pointed out its contradictions, and denied its divine origin. And so there arose in Islamism that movement which attacks dogmas and destroys faith, and substitutes for blind belief free inquiry. In Persia and in Mesopotamia had spread the new rationalism, the philosophical heresy of the Mu'tazilites, schismics, exposed by Hassan al-Basri. The Jew Abdullah ibn Saba presented himself as the prophet of the future Imam, who was to manifest. He meant to overthrow the caliphate and to uphold the rights of Muhammad al-Hanafi, the son of Ishmael, the descendant of the prophet by his daughter Fatima, the wife of Ali. Thus was founded the Shia sect. The Fatimite dynasty from Fatima, daughter of Muhammad, was founded in 909 AD when Ashmasad, the son of a Jewess who had married the Shia chief of Al-Husayn, conquered Egypt and Syria, establishing the center at Cairo. Declaring himself to be the long-expected Imam, Sad, on coming to power, assumed the name of Obadah al-Mahdi. The Fatimite dynasty lasted from 909 to 1171. Heckthorn informs us that the Dial Doat, or supreme missionary or judge, shared the power with the prince. Meetings were held in the lodge at Cairo, which contained many books and scientific instruments. Science was then professed object, but the real aim was very different. The course of instruction was divided into 9 degrees. The 9th degree, as the necessary result of the teaching of all the former, taught that nothing was to be believed, and that everything was lawful. Egypt, especially, seems as if predestined to be the birthplace of several of secret societies of priests, warriors, and fanatics. It is the region of mysteries. Cairo has succeeded the ancient Memphis, the doctrine of the Lodge of Wisdom, that of the Academy of Heliopolis. The throne of the descendants of Fatima was to be surrounded with an army of assassins, a formidable bodyguard. A mysterious militia was to be raised that should spread far and wide the fame and terror of the Caliphate of Cairo and inflict fatal blows on the abhorred rule of Baghdad. The missionaries spread widely, and in Arabia and Syria, partisans were one to whom the designs of the order were unknown, but who had, with fearful solemnity, sworn blind obedience. The Fatimites had received from the sect the mission of destroying, or at least of disrupting, Islam. The successor of Obadiah continued his work, having himself proclaimed a Shia, while in reality he was septic. It was under the Caliph Hakim that the Drusus came to being. The Shia sects, who recognized Muhammad al-Halafi as the last surviving Imam, were called Ishmaelites or Septimans. From their midst sprang a secret body, the Khoja, which, in spite of persecution, still exists in Persia and India, where its exotic chief is the angelicized Indian, the Aga Khan, whose followers are the moneylenders of Islam, a profession forbidden by Muhammad. Still another Shia sect, the Duodecimans, or Ammonites, recognize Muhammad al-Muntazar, the 12th Imam. Under the Fatimite Caliph Hakim, a new religion sprang out of Ishmaelism, that of the Drusus, so called from its inventor, a certain Darossi. This religion differs little from Ishmaelism, except that it introduces the dogma of the incarnation of God himself on earth under the form of the Caliph Hakim. When the Fatimite Caliph Mustasir ascended the throne, he reestablished the Ishmaelian belief, and the Drusus, driven from Egypt, took refuge in Lebanon, where they still exist. All right. Chapter 18, the Drusus. The Drusus, as aforestated, are a Gnostic sect among Ismailite Mohammedans. It was founded in the 10th century during the reign of the Fatimite Caliph al-Hakim Bambalehu. The founder is usually recognized as Muhammad al-Darazi or al-Druzi Naktin ben Ishmael al-Barakari, born near Bukhara, Syria, 1960. He adopted the doctrine then preached by al-Hakim of the successive reincarnations of the divinity under human form, and wrote a treatise in which he established a continuous series of divine incarnations, ending with the statement that the last living manifestation was al-Hakim, the Caliph of Egypt. So pleased was al-Hakim with the book that he called Muhammad al-Druzi to him and gave him great authority to conduct in the conduct of affairs. From that time, al-Hakim, who hitherto had been known as Bambalebalu, that is, the one governing by the order of God, changed his name to Bayameh, meaning the one governing by his own right. He then caused himself to be worshipped as God. The public reading of Muhammad al-Druzi's book in one of Cairo's mosques caused popular riots, and its author was obliged to flee from Egypt. He took refuge in the mountains of Syria and made many proselytes by allowing his adepts to use of wine, condoning licentiousness and encouraging the propagation of ideas tending to the confiscation of property. Later, he returned to Egypt, but was confronted by the power gained by one of his disciples, Hamaz al-Hadi, who had become leader of the Drusus there. In the conflict that ensued, Muhammad al-Druzi took up arms against his rival and adversary and was killed in 1019. Hamza later went to Syria and Lebanon and preached to the Drusus the doctrine of al-Hakim, such as prevailed in Egypt. Hamza was declared the prophet and Imam of al-Hakim, who, being the divine incarnation, will yet manifest himself to the Drusus, being their Messiah and give them all earthly power. The sect is divided into 3 degrees: profanes, aspirants, and wise. The Drusus, from a political point of view, are divided into 2 parts. The Drumblets, the Drumblata, and the Yesbaka. And religiously, they have their own rites, mysteries, and exoteric and esoteric doctrines. The high initiates or priests rule the people, and through religious fanaticism have deduced the Drusus to a state of theocracy. Hold on. Okay, good. Where was I? I'm sorry. The Drusus is to a state of theocracy with all its attendant law of fear and numerous restrictions upon the theocratic power can alone be edified. In his book on secret societies, Hecklethorne comments on the similarity existing between the law of the Drusus and that of the Jews, whereby to a brother perfect truth and confidence are due, but it is allowable, nay, a duty, to be false towards men of another creed. Not very good. Subsequently, he draws yet another comparison between the Drusus and the Freemasons and mentions the Masonic degrees of the United Drusus and Commanders of Lebanon. That's it. All right. Out of coffee. All right. This is chapter 19. Assassins. The Judeo-Shia sect of the Assassins, or Hashisms, was founded in 1090 by Hassan Saba, a Persian who had been initiated into Ishmaelism at Cairo in the household of the Fatimite Caliph Al-Monastir. He was known as the Old Man, or rather the Lord of the Mountain. His influence in Egypt having excited the envy of many, he was sent into exile. Caliph Al-Mustanasir's vizier was a Jew named Abu Mansur Sadiqa ibn Yusuf, under whose protection Hassan traversed Persia as a missionary, preaching and making proselytes, and having seized the fortress of Almut on the borders of Iraq and Dilim, which he called the House of Fortune. He there established his rule. The history of his time is full of his name. Kings in the very center of Europe trembled at it. His powerful arm reached everywhere. According to Hecklethorne, he reduced the 9 degrees, into which the adherents of the Lodge of Cairo were divided, to 7, placing himself at the head with title of Sedenia and Sayenda or Sidna, whence the Spanish Cid and the Italian Signor. The term assassins is a corruption of Hashism, derived from hashish, Indian hemp, with which the chief intoxicated his followers when they entered on some desperate enterprise. To regulate the 7 degrees, he composed the Catechism of the Order. The first degree recommended to the ministry attentively to what? Damn, I'm messing this one up. Sorry. Happens sometimes. The first degree recommended to the missionary attentively to watch the disposition of the candidate before admitting him to the order. The second impressed it upon him to gain the confidence of the candidate by flattering his inclinations and passions. The third to involve him in doubts and difficulties by showing him the absurdity of the Koran. The fourth to exact from him some solemn oath of fidelity and obedience, with a promise to lay his doubts before his instructor, and the fifth to show him that the most famous men of church and state belonged to the secret order. The sixth called confirmation, enjoined on the instructor to examine the proselyte concerning the whole preceding course, and firmly to establish him in it. The seventh finally called the exposition of the allegory, gave the keys of the sect. The following were divided into Two great hosts, self-sacrificers and aspirants, the first despising fatigues, dangers, and tortures, joyfully gave their lives whenever it pleased the master who required them each, either to protect himself or to carry out his mandates of death. According to the legend, the man selected by the Lord to perform the dangerous exploit was first made drunk, and in this state carried into a beautiful valley where he was on waking, surrounded by lovely sylph-like women who made him believe he was in Elysium. But ere he wearied or became satiated with love and wine, he was once more made drunk, and in this state carried back to his own home. When his services were required, he was again sent for by the Lord, who told him that he had once permitted him to enjoy paradise, and if he would do his bidding, he could luxuriate in the same delights for the rest of his life. The dupe, believing that his master had the power to do all this, was ready to commit whatever crime was required of him. Several Christian princes were suspected of conniving at the deeds of the assassin. Richard of England is one of them, and it has been the loyal task of English writers to free him from the charge of having instigated the murder of Conrad Montferrat. There also existed for a long time a rumor that Richard had attempted the life of the King of France through Hassan and his assassins. The nephew of Barbarossa, Frederick II, was excommunicated by Innocent II for having caused the Duke of Bavaria to be slain by the assassins, and Frederick II, in a letter to the King of Bohemia, accuses the Duke of Australia of having by similar agents attempted his life. The corruption of the Order of the Templars, which brought about its downfall, has been imputed by most historians to this sect, which was suppressed in 1256 when the Mongolians, led by Prince Helagu, attacked and overthrew them. Nice! Where was I? Chapter 20. The Knights Templar. The first Knights Templar Order, founded in 1118 by Hugh de Payens, had 13 degrees. So has its modern successor. These are: Blue degrees. 1. Entered Apprentice. 2. Fellow Craft. 3. Master Mason. Chapter degrees. 4. Mark Mason. 5. Past Master. 6. Most Excellent Master. 7. Royal Arch. 8. Royal Master. 9. Select Master. 10. Super Excellent Master. 11. Knights of the Red Cross. 12. Knights Templar. 13. Knights of Malta. It is chronicled that several of the founders of the Templar Order were initiates in the sect of the Assassins, which was covered last time. Blanchard, writing of it, says, during the Middle Ages, the most eminent warriors and noblemen of Europe entered its ranks. The Knights of the Temple became the bulwark of the Holy Land against the Saracens. France, England, and other countries formed associations, priories of Templar Knights, each with its own Grand Master and other officers. Such great wealth was accumulated in the treasuries of the order that in the year 1185, its annual income represented a sum equal to $30 million. The Templars were bankers and loaned money on their own terms, but wealth and prosperity naturally led to licentiousness, neglect of Templar law, and, in the end, destruction. Having embraced Gnosticism while in Palestine and in touch with the sect of the Assassins, the Templar order degenerated, and some of its members, under the influence of that sect, were said to practice phallicism, or sex worship, and Satanism, and to venerate the Baphomet, the idol of the Luciferians. The crime of sodomy was a rite of Templar initiation. It is here interesting to note that the phallus, holds the lowest rank in Brahmin theology, for in countries where the people are virtually enslaved by superstition, this kind of heresy is useful to the ruling classes. Morris thus summarizes the fall of the Templars. In the year 1307, the Grand Master of the Order, Jacques de Molay, was arrested in Paris with 60 of his knights and imprisoned upon charges of idolatry and other crimes. Shortly afterward, all the Knights Templar in France were put in prison in Paris. May 12, 1310. 54 of them were burned alive. March 18, 1314. The Grand Master, with 3 of his most eminent officers, suffered in like manner. The great possessions of the order were now confiscated and the society suppressed both by the Pope and the leading monarchs of Europe. In England, the Knights Templar were dissolved in the reign of Edward II, and after the grant of their properties to the Knights Hospitallers, these in their turn were dissolved by Henry VIII. After the death of Molay, the Knights Templar found a protector in King Denis II of Portugal, who reformed the order in 1317 under the name Knights of Christ. A complete bibliography of literature, both in print and in manuscript, dealing with the subject of the Templar Knights has been compiled by M. Dosseber, and the student is referred to in his book, Bibliography des Templars. Got that. All right. Chapter 21. Knights of Malta. The Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, or Hospitallers of St. John, afterward called Knights of Rhodes, and finally Knights of Malta, were founded about the commencement of the Crusades as a military religious order. God, do I want to go into this one? This is nuts because I just started Rosicrucians in the other one, and the next chapter after this one is the Rosicrucians, which is funny because I didn't start these motherfuckers at the same time. It's a really long one, though. That's what she said. I'll go with that tomorrow.